All right, the council is just returning from a closed session, and I will ask our city attorney if there's anything to report.
There's no reportable action.
Thank you. So I will call to order this meeting of the Atascadero City Council, October 26, 2021, and I will ask Mayor Pro Tem Newsom to lead us in a pledge to the flag.
I stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bourbeau.
Here.
Councilmember Daris.
Here.
Councilmember Funk. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Here.
Mayor Moreno.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Well, if you are watching or listening to our city council meeting tonight, we welcome you. If you would like to speak during the time that is set aside for community forum or on any one of our agenda items, you can do so in a couple of ways. If you're on this webinar, you can do so by clicking on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom webinar. And if you are on the phone, or if you're not on the phone yet, if you're watching on TV or you're listening on KPRL 1230 AM, you can dial 805-538-2888. And when you do call in, let us know what item you are wishing to speak on. Once again, that number is 805-538-2888. And with that, I will ask if we have a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion by Councilmember Funk, a second by Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, and we will waive the reading in full of all ordinances appearing on this agenda, and the titles of the ordinances will be read aloud by the city clerk at the first reading, after the motion, and before the council votes. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk.
Yes.
Councilmember Bourbeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Daris.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are on to, we have no presentations this evening, so we're on to our consent calendar, and items on the consent calendar are considered to be routine and non-controversial and can be approved in one motion if there's no member of the public or of the council who's wishing to pull an item. So I will look to my colleagues and see if there's anyone that's wishing to pull a consent calendar item. Councilmember Funk.
I don't need to pull item number 3, but I would like to, at the discretion of the chair, make a brief comment of appreciation.
That's just fine, yes. And I will then, let's see, look to the attendees. And is there anyone in the webinar or on the phone? If you're in the webinar, you can use that raise hand icon to raise your hand. And if you are on the phone, you can press *9. Anyone wishing to pull or comment on a consent calendar item? Right, I am not seeing anyone, so I will bring that back. And Councilmember Funk.
I just want to give a word of appreciation in item 3. We're awarding funds to launch planning on the downtown infrastructure enhancement project design that have come to us as a $3 million allocation, thanks to the advocacy and tireless work behind and in front of the scenes by Senator Laird. So we thank Senator John Laird for that, for finding a way to achieve an equitable solution for Atascadero to a longstanding bureaucratic problem. But instead of our losing money on old loans, he was able to get us fair treatment and get us $3 million that made us whole with interest. So we thank him very much.
And with that, we all heartily agree. And we did, of course, host him here a few months back, and we were delighted to thank him in person. So with that, might you like to make the motion on the consent calendar, Councilmember Funk?
I move approval of the consent calendar.
I see Charles seconding.
I'll second.
We've got a motion by Councilmember Funk and a second by Councilmember Bourbeau. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Funk.
Yes.
Councilmember Bourbeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Daris.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
Yes.
Mayor Moreno.
Yes, ma'am.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We are on to updates from the city manager, Ms. Rickard.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you all see my screen? Fantastic. I apologize. It's a little slow on moving sometimes. So want to talk about first Atascadero Lake Perimeter Cleanup Day. The annual cleanup was held last Saturday at Atascadero Lake, sponsored by the Friends of the Lake. There was a lot of really great work done by about 30 community volunteers, including Atascadero High School students, Boy Scouts, and council member Susan Funk, of course, was there in the pictures. A good amount of brush and vegetation was cleared out from around the lake and piled up for our city staff to haul away. And KSBY was even on hand covering the work done. This is a great partnership between Friends of the Lake and the city, where we all work together to get all that done and get that hauled out, and we appreciate that. Also last Saturday was the Central Coast Craft Beer Festival. The festival was held here at the Sunken Gardens on Saturday and was brought to us by the Central Coast Craft Brewers Guild. It was very well attended, and we estimate that over 2,000 people were here at the Sunken Gardens on Saturday afternoon. There were over 50 vendors from Monterey through Ventura, a lot of great energy and positive social media posts about the event from both guests and vendors. Zubu was also held last Saturday evening at the Charles Paddock Zoo. Everyone had a great time dressed up in their best Halloween costumes and trick-or-treating at Zubu. Over 1,000 people were at the zoo Saturday evening, enjoying a fun evening with the animals, games, and treats at the zoo. And it's become such a popular event that we had a number of guests waiting in line to get into the zoo. We'll just have to plan better next year. Due to the success, we're looking at online ticket sale options for future events like Zubu. Upcoming events. So if you missed all of those Saturday, don't worry, we have more stuff coming this week. So Farmers Market tomorrow evening will kick off Halloween. Be one of the first 20 people to come in costume to the Farmers Market information booth tomorrow from 3 to 6 p.m. and receive a free chocolate chip cookie. Go to the information booth and they will reward you with a cookie, but only if you're in costume. We also have Halloween event, Downtown Trick or Treat. This safe, family-friendly event will be held on Halloween, which is Sunday, October 31st, from 3 to 6 p.m. in downtown Atascadero. People and pets of all ages are welcome to come downtown to enjoy costume contests for family, children, and pets, a hay maze, and of course, trick-or-treating. This free-to-attend event is brought to you by the Downtown Business Improvement District Committee. And for more information about all of our events, go to visitatascadero.com. Let me also do one last plug for Russo's Spooktacular Halloween House. I have driven by it. It's pretty amazing. It's at 7720 Cortez. He's got a lot of special effects, fog machines, lights, and spooky things. He's going to have that up through Halloween night, and he has it up most nights from 6 p.m. until 10 p.m. And one last reminder also, we have our residential waste drop-off at Chicago Grade Landfill. This is for Atascadero residents only now through Saturday, October 30th. From 7:30 a.m. to 3 p.m. You can deliver acceptable items to Chicago Grade Landfill, personal vehicles only. You can't bring a big trailer in. Residents must unload the items themselves, and you must obtain a voucher from Waste Management. So if you have our Waste Management customer, residential customer here in Atascadero, you can get a voucher for one free load to the Chicago Grade Landfill. But you have to bring it there by Saturday, October 30th. So if you want more information, go to the Waste Management website and they'll be able to help you out with that. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
I must say that I like that they changed this last year, and I'm sure it had to do with COVID protocol, but in the past, all of us are getting lined up on one day to go to the corp yard and to take our load, and, it backed up quite a ways. And so this ability to kind of at your leisure for, basically a 7-day period, Sunday excluded from that week, it's really a great benefit for our residents. So I like how this is done.
I agree. It's been worked out well and was something we decided to keep going.
Yeah. Any questions on the city manager's report? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So now we will move on to community forum. This is the portion of the meeting that is reserved for those of you who would like to speak to the council on any matter that is under our jurisdiction, but which isn't on our agenda this evening. Please state your name for the record, and speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and our total time will be limited to 30 minutes for community forum. If you are on the phone, you can press *9. If you are in the webinar, you can raise your hand using the raise hand icon. And if you have not yet called in and you are watching or listening, you can do so at 805-538-2888. And with that, I see Maggie Payne.
Hello, I'm Maggie Payne from the We Are the Care initiative. For the past 2 years, we have shared the importance of childcare and the dire childcare crisis that exists in our state and our local community. We have asserted and reinforced the belief that an investment in childcare is an investment in our economy and in our community. During these past 2 years, we have asked you for your support to spread awareness, and we have sought to implement change. We come to you today with new data to support these claims. A recent study conducted by BW Research and commissioned by Cuesta College analyzes the economic impact of the childcare industry here in SLO County. This report substantiates what we already know. Childcare is truly essential to our society and to our economy. Key findings and conclusions include the following. Most childcare workers can work full-time and still not earn a living wage. The living wage for a single adult with no dependents in SLO County is roughly $38,400 per year. The average earnings for a childcare worker in the county are only $27,200, only 71% of the living wage. Childcare is expensive, and childcare workers likely cannot afford full cost childcare for their own children. The average cost of childcare in the county is roughly $10,000 per year. There's a large need for additional childcare capacity in SLO County. The conservative estimate suggests that 2,300 children in the county may have working parents but are not able to be enrolled in a program. Meeting 100% of the low-end estimates for the potential need for childcare in SLO County would increase gross regional product by more than $108 million annually and support and create 425 jobs from this new economic activity. Meeting the entirety of the high-end estimate of the potential childcare demand would have an even greater economic impact, contributing $734 million to the GRP, roughly equivalent to the GRP contributions of full-service restaurants, residential property managers, and hotels combined. This report will be emailed to you, and we encourage you to read it in its entirety. The study makes a strong case that childcare benefits not only children and families, but our community and our economy as a whole. For more ways to get involved with We Are the Care, please contact us at First 5 SLO County or go to www.first5slo.org. Thank you all so much for your time, and we will be back again soon with more information and more updates.
Thank you, Ms. Payne. Is there anyone else that would wish to speak? If you do, please raise your hand or press *9 on the phone. I am not seeing any hands. I'm going to give it a moment here. I will ask, do we have anybody on the call, Luke? I don't see a hand, but you might see someone I don't.
Yeah, we have no colors.
Okay, going once, going twice. All right, we will go ahead and close public comment or community forum, I should say. And we certainly appreciate Ms. Payne, and we look forward to seeing that report from you. We are now on to, we have no public hearings tonight, so we're on to our first of 2 management reports. And this is an affordable housing impact fee nexus study update. And our community development director, Mr. Phil Dunsmore, will be making the presentation.
And good evening, Council. Actually, our consultant, from MIG and EPS, will be making the basis of this presentation. I'll remain available to answer questions, but however, I'd like to start by introducing Genevieve Charo from MIG, who's going to talk about the update. And really, what I do want to summarize, though, this is one piece of the topic. And tonight, it's really sort of a touching base in terms of where we are. It's a progress report. It's an update. So no action to be taken tonight, but definitely want to provide you some good information. So I'm going to hand it over to Genevieve, and I think our other consultant with EPS, Ashley, is actually going to run the presentation. So Luke, if I can have you give permissions to Ashley to run a presentation and screen the sheet. Oh, there we go. We're already up. We're going. All right. And take it away, Genevieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil, and Mayor and City Council members. Thank you for having us here tonight to talk about the Affordable Housing Nexus Study. So, Ashley, do you want to go to the next slide? So I wanted to just start out by giving you a little context and a little history of where we're coming from to bring us to tonight. So back in November of last year, the City Council adopted an update to the housing element. The housing element, as you know, is one of the elements or chapters of the city's general plan or kind of guiding document. And the housing element identified a need for a variety of different new housing opportunities across a variety of different income categories, with the median home price in Atascadero now reaching about $675,000. So the housing element identifies local housing goals and programs to implement to meet those goals over the next 8 years. So it addresses local policy, but it's also kind of an agreement with the state to meet those identified housing needs. So to meet those needs, a variety of different tools and incentives are necessary, especially to support more affordable housing at the lower income levels. And not all tools will meet all of those needs. So our discussion tonight focuses on one of those tools, an affordable housing impact fee program. So this tool recognizes that additional funding is necessary to subsidize affordable units, especially those at the very low and low income categories. And impact fees are used by communities throughout the state to provide an opportunity to have a local funding source for affordable housing to help support affordable housing projects that need that gap financing. Local funding comes in there as a really important source. So these fees do require a technical study to determine the relationship between the new market rate development that's happening in town and the demand for more affordable housing. This is sometimes referred to as a nexus. Ashley, can you go to the next slide? So just to kind of harken back to what happened over the last year or two, the housing element process really gave us a good opportunity to talk with folks in the community about their housing needs and ideas. And then we also were able to strategize with City Council back in March about which tools should be pursued to increase more housing opportunity for a variety of different income levels in Atascadero. Next slide. So at that meeting back in March, we heard from City Council a desire to explore kind of a multifaceted approach because of the kind of competing demands and various tools that are necessary. So Council directed staff to do some more research into the potential of an affordable housing linkage fee or impact fee to capture those opportunities for lower income household housing units. And also kind of a separate process to also look into options for encouraging and incentivizing more affordability by design, which can help capture some of those moderate income or workforce housing units. So tonight we're going to discuss the affordable housing impact fee piece of the program. And I want to turn it over to my colleagues at EPS, Ashley and Jake, and I'll let them introduce themselves and take it away about our discussion tonight on the impact fee.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jake Craner. I'm a senior associate with EPS, and I'm the project manager for this assignment. I'm joined by Ashley Cannett, who's a principal in our Oakland office, who is acting as principal in charge. Economic and Planning Systems has over 35 years of experience in a variety of urban economics and public finance related practice areas. most pertinent to this evening is our expertise in housing policy, and we've carried out a number of similar affordable housing impact fee studies similar to the one we will be describing tonight. Next slide, please. So what is this assignment specifically designed to do? So number one is the nexus studies, both for rental housing and for sale housing. And this involves estimating demand for affordable housing generated by new market rate housing. And we discussed this issue with a number of local industry experts to get their input on a few different issues, and we'll cover that, I believe, on the next slide. But the Nexus study also involves identifying the affordability gap. So that's what households, the difference between what it costs to build an affordable unit and what low and very low income households can actually afford. So the difference between those numbers is what we're referring to as the affordability gap. And then based on the new demand for affordable housing and the gap and the affordability gap, we calculate the impact fee per new market rate unit. After we do that, what generally happens is this new nexus-based fee is way too high for any developer to absorb. So we also perform a feasibility analysis, and from that arrive at fee level recommendations. And we also calibrate this based on a survey of fees in similar jurisdictions in the region and across the state. After doing that, we will also be providing input on an inclusionary housing program, as well as in lieu fee for city staff and council consideration. And then also we will be writing reports and making presentations such as this one. So next slide, please.
I think we're there on the industry outreach.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so as I mentioned, we spoke to a number of experts in the region involved in both affordable and market rate housing. And this was done to gain deeper insight into local housing market dynamics and issues, identify key features of the residential development process in Atascadero and San Luis Obispo County more broadly, as well as to vet assumptions we used in our affordability gap analysis, which we'll discuss shortly. So the people we interviewed represented a number of different types of organizations, both affordable and market rate developers, as well as regional housing authorities, housing finance providers, and housing-focused nonprofits. Okay, so the Nexus study methodology is designed to determine the impact of new market rate housing on the need for local affordable housing. So before we go through step by step, the gist of the Nexus is that new owners of market rate housing and who presumably occupy the unit they purchased spend money in the community, thereby generating the need for jobs. And some of these jobs pay wages at low or very low incomes. And these households then require affordable housing units. So step by step, what we do is we look at the type of housing that is being built in the community and identify how much these units typically cost. And from that, we estimate how much the households buying them earn on an annual basis. The next step is to determine how much they spend in the community in terms of industry and what types of jobs would arise from this spending. There are a number of publicly available data sources such as BLS and the US Economic Census we use to make these estimations. Also, BLS informs us how much these employees earn whose services are required based on this new spending. And then by learning how much these employees earn, we know what income categories they fall under, either very low or low income. So those that fall into those lower income categories require affordable units. However, they can't based on the rent they can afford to pay, they can't cover the cost necessary to build these units, as I discussed when describing the affordability gap. So we have to estimate that gap, and then based on that, we generate the nexus-based maximum impact fee. Okay, so one thing we have already completed as part of this assignment is the affordability gap. And what we did here was, through our conversations with city staff and local and regional housing experts, we identified a prototype for affordable housing. So obviously, households making lower incomes can live in a variety of different housing types. But for this exercise, we decided to identify the most efficient way of housing these lower income workers. So what we decided on, based on our conversations, was essentially a 3-story stacked flat building at a density of at 24 units per acre, with each unit averaging 900 square feet of livable space, 1,000 square feet gross, but that includes things like hallways and maintenance, electricity and plumbing and things like that we need to know the cost of the overall building. But the unit themselves are about 900 square feet, an average of 2 bedrooms, which we assume house 3 people, and then would require 2 parking spaces based on city code. So as I mentioned, we estimated the total cost of construction for a unit like this, and based on local construction costs, as well as soft costs like architecture, marketing, and things like that, as well as developer profit for an affordable housing developer, we estimate that these types of units would cost around $580,000. Based on the county, California HCD's income limits for San Luis Obispo County, the rent that could be paid by a household of this size, 3 people, would only be able to support about $190,000. So the affordability gap for very low income households is about $395,000. Low income, 3-person household makes obviously a little bit more than that, but there's still a fairly substantial gap, a little over $200,000. So that's one step of the analysis we've completed, but to continue with this analysis, we do require a bit of guidance from the council, and Ashley will talk through that a bit with you.
Thank you so much, Jake, and Genevieve before Jake, and Phil before Genevieve. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight and to be kicking off this project publicly with you. Tonight, we're wanting to hear your thoughts on 2 questions related to how the fee may eventually be implemented. And we're asking these questions now before we get too far into our calculations, because the direction you provide tonight will impact how we go about our calculations. And the first question is really about fee structure. And what I mean by that is the basis for charging the fee. And what I mean by this is, imagine that you're the applicant and you're doing some research about Atascadero's development impact fees. And as you look at the fee schedule, how will you know which fee applies to your project? Will there be enough transparency and clarity on the fee schedule that you can easily calculate what your fee will be? And so tonight we have 5 options to present to you, and we'll go through each of them one by one. The second question is around potential exemptions. There are some legally required exemptions. That is the type of it's a type of development that are legally exempt from impact fees. But then there can be policy exemptions as well. And the policy exemptions are the city's opportunity to encourage certain types of residential development. And we'll get there towards the end. But for now, let's take a quick look at our 5 options for charging the fees. And this is, I know, a way too small summary of the 5 options. I just wanted to give you the bird's eye view of what we'll be discussing tonight. And these 5 options are presented because based on our very preliminary analysis, it suggests that each of these options has the potential to underpin a reasonable nexus argument. So if you think back to Jake's slide, the one where he presented the methodology, the true basis of the fee will be the income and spending patterns of the occupants of the new market rate housing. And household income is not always, but typically related to the size of the new home and the price of the new home. So again, based on preliminary research, each of these options reflects potential differences in household unit sizes or home prices, and then by correlation, household income. I will go through all of them one by one, but we'll just note here in a summary sort of way that options A and B are fairly typical. We see them frequently across the state. Options C, D, and E are included here because they reflect circumstances really specific to Atascadero, where there might be potential to reflect meaningful differences in unit values, which again translates into meaningful differences in household incomes. And it's these distinctions that would justify differential fees and justify a distinction in how the fee is charged. And of course, to make it complicated, various combinations are possible too, but we'll discuss those as we move through. So option A is a very typical approach with clear definitions around what single family means and what multifamily means. It's a very straightforward to administer fee program. But by charging the fee on a per unit basis, you have all new single family homes, for example, paying the same fee, whether a home is 1,500 square feet or 3,500 square feet. And this could have the effect of discouraging those affordable by design, those smaller affordable by design units that Genevieve was describing. Option B is a variation. It's increasingly common. It charges the fee based on a per square foot fee. So you might have one fee per square foot for single family homes and one fee per square foot for multifamily homes. The fee would cap out based on the maximum fee that is calculated as part of the nexus study. That is the whole idea of the nexus study. It establishes, the highest fee that can be supported through the nexus calculations. Not that you would necessarily adopt fees at their maximum levels, as Jake suggested. There are other considerations, but more on that later. This option is becoming more common as jurisdictions are really tuning into the potential to incentivize affordable by design with this per square foot fees. So long as the definition of the type of square footage that counts is clear, this is a really easy to administer and easy for the applicant to figure out. Over in the cons column, we have three related points that are best, I think, illustrated with real numbers. So the first bullet is that the fee will tier down from a per unit amount that is established through Nexus and that's tied to the median size home. So for example, this is just illustrative. These aren't real numbers, just for math to make the point. So if the Nexus study establishes a fee of $10,000 per unit and the median size home is 2,000 square feet, the resulting fee would be $5 a square foot. That's our 10,000 maximum fee divided by the 2,000 square feet. And the adopted fee schedule would say new residential development will pay an affordable housing impact fee of $5 a square foot. The second bullet point here is that the new units that are smaller than the median size home will not generate as much revenue as they would have under a flat fee per unit structure. So sticking with that example, let's say we had a new 1,500 square foot home and they're going to pay $5 a square foot for a total fee of $7,500. There's a delta there between the maximum fee of $10,000 and the $7,500 that we would charge this smaller unit. So that difference is an incentive potentially to build a smaller unit that may be more naturally affordable, but at the same time, that's $2,500 that you won't be collecting to put towards creating more affordable housing opportunities in the city. Trade-offs. This whole study is going to be about trade-offs. The third bullet is that the total fee obligation can't exceed the maximum fee established by a nexus. So if you get a really large unit and the $5 per square foot fee results in a total fee that would exceed the nexus maximum, you could find that you have large units that are paying less on a per square foot basis because they're capped by that nexus maximum. So again, with our example, a new 2,500 square foot home, for example, would not pay $12,500, even though that's what 2,500 square feet times $5 a square foot is, because that would exceed the maximum nexus allowed fee in our world of a $10,000 maximum. So rather, that $2,500 square foot home would pay the $10,000, and it ends up being less on a per square foot basis than the smaller home. So there's an issue of perception there that will come up again. Option C, well, the next three options included here are included here because they really reflect circumstances specific to Atascadero, again, where there might be the potential to reflect meaningful differences in unit values, which translates into meaningful differences in household income. So this option uses unit size threshold as a way of potentially differentiating the fees. And Atascadero has some large homes, and the preliminary data suggests that there's a concentration of units below 2,000 square feet and a concentration of units above 2,000 square feet, where the average unit size of the smaller units and the average unit size of the larger units is meaningfully different. So that's a pro, strong nexus, strong connections there between the size of the unit, household value, and household income. The con in this case is more a problem of perception than anything else. It's related to the point I made on the last slide. And that's, to use another example, let's say again that you have a maximum fee of $10,000 per unit for the homes that are under 2,000 square feet and a maximum fee of $15,000 for the larger homes. And that's what we're doing. We're establishing different maximum fees for each of these groups. If the average unit size of the smaller units is $1,500 a square foot, you would get a per square foot fee of $6.67. If the average unit size among the larger units is 3,000 square feet, you would get a per square foot fee of around $5 per square foot. So the fee per square foot for the larger units would be smaller, but because the units are larger, the total fee obligation ends up being more than for the smaller units. So it's a perception issue, and one that we can probably work around through implementation. Option D is a similar approach, but it uses zoning as a way of potentially differentiating the fees. So Atascadero, as you know, has a residential suburban zoning district, RS, that allows large lot residential uses in areas outside of the urban services line, or in other areas where large lots are desirable for a range of issues, topographical mostly is my understanding. If there are meaningful differences in home size and home price, and therefore household income based on zoning, this option is a contender. But I would say that zoning is not always a perfect indicator of land use type or of home size for that matter. For example, you have residential suburban zoned properties along El Camino Real, but you also have larger value parcels on the west side of town. So while we're not writing this one off just yet, and we did want to share the option with you, there may not be as meaningful of a distinction in unit size when compared across the zoning designations, just based on the recent permit history that we've been looking at. Where we do see meaningful differences is with option E. Rather than having a threshold of unit size or a zoning designation, we could distinguish fees based on whether the new residential development is within or outside of the urban services line. It's possible that once we crunch the numbers, we might be presented with the same perception problem of having a lower square foot fee outside the urban services line than within, but the total fee would be higher outside because the homes are typically larger. So option E is the fifth option we wanted to describe to you tonight. And I am going to move on to the question of potential exemptions and then close with next steps. And then I'm looking forward to your thoughts and direction on both of the policy questions before you tonight. So the second question here is really around any preliminary thoughts you might have around potential exemptions. Again, there are these legally required exemptions that are state statute. We're going to follow the law. Sorry. Not sorry. We are going to follow the law. And these are the legally required exemptions around ADUs under 750 square feet, for example. They're exempt from development impact fees, as are deed restricted affordable units. But there are a range of examples I've put up on the slide here that are potential policy exemptions. And these are for you to think about in terms of whether or not you want to incentivize certain types of development. Some potential exemptions that we see in other communities are units that are affordable by design, where the size of the unit, where we fix the size of the unit. It could be smaller than 1,000 square feet. It could be at some other size threshold. Sometimes we see exemptions for areas that are targeted for infill development. There are deed restricted units that are deed restricted, not just affordable, but for age, for example. Sometimes when units are replaced due to redevelopment or maybe rebuilt post a natural disaster, those might be reasons to exempt the new development as well. And so what we'll do tonight is listen to your discussion. Even hearing your back and forth is really helpful to us because it helps us understand the nuances that you're wrestling with. But we'll incorporate that input and we'll direct it towards a preferred fee structure. We'll complete our preliminary nexus analysis and the calculation of the maximum fees. And then, as Jake mentioned, we'll conduct the feasibility analysis, which is a fee survey, and the financial analysis as well. And then we'll be back before you potentially several times, where we want to give you plenty of opportunity to determine the appropriate discounts and exemptions, and to make sure that we're properly balancing the need for affordable housing with community and economic growth. And with that, I'll stop. I will I can either stop sharing or I can go back to this summary slide, which maybe will help facilitate.
Ashley, why don't you keep it up there? I have a feeling that when we ask you questions, some of the council members will say, hey, could you go back to this slide? So this is fine, and we'll direct you from here. So thank you all for your various parts to the presentation. And just to let the public know, because I am seeing hands already, we will get to public comment. You can be certain. Feel free to keep your hand up if you like, but right now we're going to start with council questions. We will go to public comment and then we'll come back and we'll have some more discussion. So what I want to be clear on tonight, while we're not voting on anything, what you do want from us is some direction, and I see it kind of multifaceted. There is the yes or no, are we all in agreement that we want to go in this direction of some type of inclusionary fee? If yes, then you want to know what are the options or the aspects of the options that we, are more inclined towards. And B, you would want to know what exemptions we would like to consider. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. All right, with that, I will look to my council members for questions. Councilmember Funk.
Yes, I have a number of questions here so I can clarify the numbers and make sure that I understand the basis upon which we're being asked to give guidance. Let me first start by going back to the analysis of the affordability gap. And just acknowledging that we have, you mentioned that that Zillow says we've got about a $675,000 median price for any housing at all in the community. And we assume that median square footage is going to be definitely above 1,200 square feet. There's going to be something closer to maybe 2,000 square feet as an example. Do I understand that the cost to build a really basic 900 square foot apartment is estimated at $585,000, or a very substantial proportion of the median price of a much larger single family home in the community?
Yes, that was the results of our analysis. And some of the input we received from members of the development community were that their profit margins in Atascadero were somewhat lower than they were able to achieve elsewhere in the county. So that made us think that our results were consistent with what's actually being done.
There's one additional nuance I'd like to add, which is when we're looking at the development costs, we're looking at new construction, whereas that Zillow home price is reflective of all of the inventory that is changing hands, whether it was built very recently or in the past. So it's a different stock than we're contemplating here. And construction costs, I'm sure you've been reading the headlines, have been really increasing very quickly.
And one other thing to add is in our analysis, we have to assume prevailing wage given government involvement, whereas that might not always be the case elsewhere.
Okay. That also would help explain the difference. Okay. There's a comment on this fees in item D in our report, but not necessarily up here. There's a comment that the many undeveloped parcels left on the west side within the RS zoning might not support larger homes. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
I may need to defer to Kelly or Phil potentially.
Councilmember Fong, could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Okay, so it's this is in the staff report on page 92 at the bottom. This is reference to item D on the fee structure options. There's a comment that in the cons for this particular approach that many undeveloped parcels that are left on the west side within the RS zoning are difficult parcels to develop with larger homes. Is that saying that basically because of topography and what's developed and what's not, that we're not going to have a lot of big McMansions out there in the on the west side, that everything, you're saying that what's been built up, what can be built up into really larger homes has probably already been done?
That's a little bit of an assumption, because you can still build a really big house on a very challenging steep site if you do it multi-story and step it. But basically, yeah, that's what's left out there is very tree covered, very steep sites, oftentimes with drainage just going through them, creeks, difficult setback issues, difficult access issues. But it's amazing right now, we're still seeing some larger houses squeeze into those particularly challenging sites. So it's a bit of an assumption. So, I mean, it's maybe something to consider.
Okay.
When you're closer in, it might be easier. I mean, we've seen multifamily sites develop with 2,500 and 3,000 square foot homes in a planned development situation. Very interesting.
Is it possible to, among the various options here, is it possible to base to segment our fee structure based on whether this is a high fire risk area? Because we have a lot of areas of high fire risk in our community, and those developments in those areas generate different kinds of jobs and costs in the community because of the the design requirements, brush clearance requirements, weed abatement, and the fact that they are that they require a level of support from our fire services, and yet are at, generally speaking, longer distances from the stations.
Yeah, so I appreciate this question because it lets me make the point again that addressing the city's affordable housing objectives and goals is going to require a really broad range of tools, and no one tool, no one program is going to get us all the way there. What you just described sounds a lot more to me like fiscal mitigation that might be required, because these homes require disproportionate public services than other homes. But what we are looking at here are the characteristics of the home, the characteristics of the occupants living in the home, and the household spending in the economy that is resulting. And so I'm not seeing as clear of a nexus between household spending on goods and services in the economy and what you just described.
Yeah, I mean, one could make, we can come back to that in discussion, because that's not really a further comment on that as a question, but it's not a question. And then in looking at the potential exemptions that you've outlined, in considering possible exemptions for replacement units or rebuilt units following a disaster, is it possible to structure those kinds of exemptions so that you don't have somebody kicking out the tenant of a rundown unit that was affordable and rebuilding a nice fancy unit that now that tenant can no longer afford, and therefore displacing the tenant from the affordable unit while not having to pay any impact fee for affordable housing? Can we structure around that kind of risk?
That's an interesting point, and I think it's something that we probably can think about addressing at the implementation stage.
Okay, thank you. That'll do me for now.
There are council questions. Councilmember Dara is followed by Councilmember Borbo.
I just thank you. I just have one quick question on option C here. The difference between, you say you could potentially end up with lower fees for larger units. The question I have is, I don't know if I missed this while you were explaining, is how are the maximum fees established for these two levels, above 2,000 and below 2,000, and why can't the maximum for the above 2,000 be adjusted so that way that type of thing doesn't happen?
So there is a lot that we can take care of in the technical work, but it all goes back to that methodology slide that Jake described, where we start by looking at the income characteristics of the occupants in the new market rate homes. And if you were to direct us, for example, to proceed with an option like option C, we would slice our data differently from the beginning. So we would look at we would look at data that is reflective of units that are 2,000 square feet or smaller. And then we would look at all the data of units that are 2,000 square feet or larger, and we would run separate analyses for each of these cohorts. So for each cohort, if you will, I'm not sure if that's quite the right word, we would end up with a different maximum fee. So it's why we're asking the questions now, because it affects the way we look at the data.
And have we been able to determine what the maximum for C would be for us, or are we too early in that stage?
A little too early. We haven't quite gotten there. Wanted to be efficient with our analysis here.
Okay, so we don't know how far off we would be if the larger units would have a smaller fee. We don't have any clue as to where we're at with that just yet.
Not yet.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Borbo.
Thank you. And I apologize. I have several questions, so I apologize to those waiting to make public comment. So first of all, want to understand, and maybe this will help the public understand the basic concept of nexus here. Reading in the staff report, the basic idea is that market rate housing development in general generates the need for increased services, thus added service sector employees. So, and of course, this is all, based on generalities, and I think we all understand that. But so is that to say that, if I buy a market rate house, it is presumed I'm going to go, I don't know, buy a latte every day and a Jamba Juice, and maybe I'm going to, go out to eat or whatever. I'm going to do things that involve and require the employment of service sector employees, who in turn are going to have difficulty finding affordable housing because our housing is very expensive. Is that?
Yep, that was great.
That's kind of the general concept, right? And then conceptually, if I live in a McMansion and logically speaking, make a lot more money, not only am I going to do those things, I might have a gardener, a housekeeper, a pool maintenance guy, I don't know, somebody to tune up my yacht, something like that. I'm going to entail a lot more services, I guess, if you will. So if that's the concept, why is there a maximum? Because I mean, in theory, the guy in the 10,000 square foot McMansion is going to generate a lot more need for service employees than the guy in the 5,000 square foot McMansion versus the nice 2,500 square foot home versus the 1,000 square foot home.
It's a really good question. There is a curve that we see. You can sort of keep on going and follow it, but it's what the Mitigation Fee Act requires, which is the state statute. So through nexus logic, we have to establish that maximum fee, and so we do it by. And there's a lot we don't know at the outset, right? We are establishing a fee program based on development that will occur in the future, but we don't know very much yet about those specific development projects. So we have to rely on, professional judgment and industry standards and our observations of what we're seeing in the community. So between the sort of typical new development and the nexus requirement through state law that we arrive at a maximum fee, that's what we'll be doing for the city of Atascadero.
But you did mention in, I think under option C, that there are, if you look at above average homes and below average size homes, there's a significant, I think you mentioned the words that there could be a different maximum for those in the above average size category and the below average size category.
Right. So in theory, this would be a much more complicated fee program to administer. So this isn't a recommendation. You could have a lot of categories. You could say we want a fee structure for units, below 2,000 square feet, and then for in between 2,000 and 3,000, and in between 4,000 and 5,000, and 5,000 plus. We can technically create all of those different categories, and you would end up with different maximums within each of those categories.
And you didn't list this as an option, but under that concept of option C, have you ever seen anybody do it on a more sliding scale? And first, let me ask the question of, when you talk about, you're using 2,000 square feet as a threshold, are suggesting that, and of course, below 750, you can't charge a fee at all. We're suggesting that it be $1 amount per square foot, let's say 750 to 2,000, and then be a different amount for every square foot over 2,000, or a different amount for every square foot on a house that's greater than 2,000.
So I wanted to clarify just one thing so that it's not distracting to the conversation. The exemption for units smaller than 750 square feet just applies to accessory dwelling units. Unless you, as a matter of policy, want to provide an exemption for standalone units that are smaller. I have seen fee schedules where there are.
Yeah, I forgot that. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course.
But go ahead.
I have seen fee schedules where there are sliding scales and where there are per square foot charges that vary in pretty regular increments. It's a much more complicated fee program to administer. There is less clarity typically for the development community at the outset as they're contemplating their projects, to the extent that their square footage of the units are still moving around somewhat. It is mathematically possible, something we could certainly look into. My experience is it's more complicated for city staff to administer.
Okay, and then I would just be concerned that whenever government imposes an artificial line, then you're going to end up having, let's say, a whole bunch of houses maybe artificially capped at $19.99 because they're trying to avoid a higher fee if it's charged on every square foot when they go over 2,000. But on the basic bar chart on page 91, the affordability gap, Councilmember Funk already asked my question about how 585 for a basic, essentially multifamily unit at 24 per acre seems extremely high. But regardless of what the dollar amount is, the affordability gap is in effect the amount that the developer essentially has to subsidize, if I'm correct. In other words, or we're expecting the system to subsidize. And maybe I should back up and ask a question to staff first, which is, under our existing inclusionary policies, don't we require when we're approving let's say a project with 10 units, don't we require them to provide 2 units that are affordable without paying fees?
Our requirement only kicks in when there's a rezoning or another action that requires city council approval. And then it's based on 5% of building valuation. It is based on a certain number of units that need to be incorporated into the project. And there's some discussion on that based on the scope of the project and the level of housing that's being offered. So I think that we've sort of played with that a little bit over the years. And that's kind of why we're in this spot, is we needed something that's a little more definitive and contemporary of a policy.
Right, but I thought we had like 20%.
I think we do in
requirement, and it was, for obviously for projects that required council approval, and it was only if they didn't actually provide the units that they paid the fee. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, they had the option of providing units in the project.
And so what we're talking about tonight, would that still be the case, where in essence we're only talking about those fees paid when a developer doesn't actually provide the units?
Yeah, so this is one component of the potential affordable housing program. Part of that component is the implementation of a potential fee program, and another part is potential implementation of an affordable housing program, or if they build units that are already affordable by design, they might be exempt altogether. So there's all sorts of pieces to this, and this is just one particular section that we're really focusing in on tonight. Is, do we want to go this way? And if we do go this way, here's some thoughts.
Okay, because what I'm concerned about understanding is that, so if somebody comes to us and they want to build 100 units, it's already zoned that way, it doesn't require any council action, they don't have to pay the fee. And they also, would it also be true they don't have to provide affordable units?
That is true.
Right.
Exactly.
So
if they're allowed to do that project by right without discretion, yes.
So this only applies to ones where they're wanting something from the city that's not by right. So comes to council, and we, by existing policy, would require them to provide the units.
Yeah, that's right. Now keep in mind,
and absent an ability to do that for some reason, we require it by paying a fee. And what fee formula are we currently using?
Keep in mind also what's happening right now at the state level is the state is essentially taking away a lot of discretionary actions on housing projects. So we're going to be left eventually without the ability to have an affordable housing program, although we might see more projects that volunteer the construction of affordable housing as there's more grant funding coming out for that.
And what formula do we currently use for the in lieu of housing fees that we charge?
So we have 5% of building valuation right now.
Okay, and yet 5% evaluation wouldn't be anywhere near enough to cover this affordability gap, right?
Let's say the typical building valuation, well, like we were talking about earlier, it might be $400,000 to build a mid-sized home, but still, yeah, it's not going to be enough.
If I may, I do want to be sure that we're being clear about what program we're talking about tonight. So the city currently has an inclusionary housing program where there's an on-site requirement and an in lieu fee if the developer opts not to provide those units on site. My understanding is that it's not used very often right now because the state density bonus is a more attractive option for developers. What we have been directed to do is establish, or at least do the preliminary work for a nexus-based development impact fee. And that program has its statutory authorization in state law. It's the AB 1600 fee. Folks talk about, I think you have a transportation fee. You have several development impact fees right now. So it's a very different authorization, and all new residential development, unless exempted through the ordinance, would pay the fee.
Great, thank you. And I understand, I'll get to the 5 options, but I'm trying to understand the magnitude of what is the potential here, because I'm trying to wrap my head around, if we're talking about trying to, we're talking about these affordability gaps of $200,000 and $300,000 on a unit. And all of that is essentially coming out of the developer's hide, and which, when it's that big, it reduces the number of projects that pencil out for them, and we end up with less housing for everybody. And so I'm trying to understand it. Trying to understand the kind of the perspective, the scope of this. Let me get to a specific question about the options. I asked about that, about C. On D, I was trying to understand on E, what would be the nexus between inside or outside the urban services line?
Yeah, thank you. So what we've seen, a preliminary look at the data. I just want to call it a preliminary look at the data that is looking at homes that have recently applied for building permits. I think it's the last 3 or so years that we've taken a look at. When we sort by homes that are inside the urban services line versus outside, we see much larger homes outside the urban services line. So to the extent that the size of the home is related to the value of the home, and therefore what it takes to be able to afford that home and the household income of the occupants, we start to draw our nexus logic there.
Okay, but isn't size itself, wouldn't that be the more reasonable? It seems like it's kind of a proxy for size. Or are you saying that because they have large lots, they're more likely to have higher household incomes than just the large house?
No, you're right. It's a proxy for size, really.
Okay, all right, thank you. And then I'm always a little confused. If I understand this question for Mr. Dunsmore, Paso Robles does not have an inclusionary housing ordinance, as I understand it. And I'm always wondering how they achieve. Not that any city fully achieves their affordable housing goals, especially for low and very low. But I'm wondering, they tended to overall have done the best in the county, if I recall, a little bit better than us and best in the county. How do they achieve that without having even an ordinance at all, let alone a specific set of fees?
I think Atascadero has also done really well. So I don't know if they've done the best in the county, but they achieve it because there is density bonus laws. There is incentives that the state offers. There's all kinds of tax credit programs that affordable housing developers get. So they do some affordable housing units anyway. Can we complete our arena that way? Probably not. Is Paso going to have to eventually do an affordable housing program? Probably yes, the way things are going. And when we adopted our housing element this year, it was based on us implementing an affordable housing program that had these options. And I believe Paso Robles has that in their housing element as well. So at some point, they're going to have to move forward with that, and we're going to have to face that. Now, the good thing is even though we have a fee structure we're talking about here tonight, the actual fee amounts can be any amount you want, not to exceed the maximum. So even if you charge 20 cents a square foot and you created some income that we can have to provide towards affordable housing, eventually it'll help, especially if we also have incentives to create these smaller units and to create some affordable units within each project. I think that's where we're trying to go. I think the consultants at some point, we're going to tell you, hey, here's the maximum nexus. Do we have to go with that? No. But do we need a program that spreads out this impact more widely throughout the city, more widely distributed throughout the city for all development? Yes, we might need that. As it stands now, it's very challenging to get the very low and extremely low units. We get all the moderates we need. We probably get all the low that we need. And we do have a lot of good voluntary affordable projects coming forward right now. For example, at the, there's a couple of apartment projects on the south end of the city that will be coming forward to the design review committee and the planning commission here soon. And they aren't doing it because we have an affordable housing program. They are doing it because they have other incentives to build those projects.
And Phil, if I
Thank
might
you.
add, just
That's all I have for now.
if I might just add a little bit of context on Paso as well. One other thing that might make it a little bit easier for them is they do have their own housing authority. So, and they had a lot of public housing that has been rehabilitated over the years. But they have a big chunk of that as well.
Councilmember Darris.
Thank you. I just had just a follow-up question and to touch on a little bit what Phil was just talking about, and going back to option C, and Ashley, you were talking about, the possibility of tier between different, 2,000 and 3,000, 2004 and 5 and whatever, and up to a certain amount, being a much more complicated system to implement. But the question I have is, would it incentivize more affordable housing? I mean, I can appreciate that being complex, but if it's going to incentivize, I'm wondering if it's not one of the better options. But I'm just wondering if you can touch on that.
Has the potential to, but it's what we often see actually is that the when you look at these sort of threshold points, what you actually often see is a higher per square foot fee in the smaller categories. And the limit is just the threshold that you've set on unit size more than anything else. So it can mathematically get a little bit squirrely there. I think the biggest incentive is really that per square foot charge, where the applicant is in control of what their fee is to a certain extent, because they will drive a project size, not just because of the fee levels, but it's part of their criteria.
Okay.
Any other council questions? Councilmember Funk.
I have one follow-up. Ashley, you described an analytical process that means that the decisions we make tonight affect how you cut the data. How locked in are we to the guidance that we give you tonight? If we say, we like option C, and you slice the data that way, and it comes back and it doesn't make sense to do that, because once you actually see what the numbers are, will you be able to support us in moving with some of these other options?
Yes, I do not want you to end up with a fee program that doesn't make sense. So I'm here at sort of a delicate point where I'm looking for some direction. But once we really get into the weeds, we'll make a determination about whether or not the nexus logic is strong enough to support and strong enough to defend. And I'm happy to entertain some kind of squishy discussion direction and take the gist of it and help have that inform, as robust of a fee program as we can put together for you. So please don't feel locked in. I won't take you down a path where we don't have strong nexus.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Ashley, we've thrown around some, just sample fees of like $10,000 max or something like that. And I know you don't have real numbers for us tonight, but if you could say, on average, this might be a typical fee on a typical home, just for sake of example.
So what happens, or Phil, are you blocking your ears? What tends to happen is that through this Nexus project, we end up with fees that you would never want to charge. And that happens across the state. It happens in communities everywhere. There is so much need for affordable, housing, that the fees that we can support often end up being much, much higher than the fees that we want to charge for a whole range of issues, right? You might not want to be 4 times higher than your peer cities in the county or in neighboring counties. You don't want to, thwart or staunch new market rate development. We want all new housing. So there are all these other criteria, and we are going to, we'll get to the maximum fees, but then we'll take all of these other inputs and we're really going to triangulate on fees that make sense for the city of Atascadero. So that's the preamble to answering the question. Often, I was just looking at a fee study that was done in your county, and the maximum fees for residential units were in the $60,000 a unit range. So that's not what the city that I'm talking about is going to charge by any stretch, but that's what Nexus supported.
Okay, so I'm trying to put together a scenario in which we say, let's assume we get X per unit. We get this pile of cash over, let's say, 2 years. And so, Phil, I'm just going to come up with a number that I have no idea if this is correct. But let's say in 2 years, we have $3 million sitting in this account that's come from impact fees for affordable housing. Now, with that 3 million, I'm assuming that there are a couple of different options. One, we can give to projects like we have with, say, People's Self-Help Housing, that comes in and they have a project to build low or very low housing, and they come to us for a certain amount of grant, if you will, from our affordable housing fees, and then we give them that money to build. Is that one of those options?
Yes.
In that option, is People's Self-Help Housing or someone like them as a nonprofit, are they then subject to pay prevailing wage?
In some cases, they are, yes.
In some cases, but not all?
So that's probably a good, it changes. That's a good legal question. I don't know the ins and outs of that when it comes to how those fees are used and where they're going, and whether they're used to pay for actual construction, pay down development impact fees, or to put up to match their state funding that they get for tax credit financing. So there's probably ways they can avoid paying prevailing wage, but most commonly, yes, it is going to trigger paying prevailing wage.
I do see our attorney, Mr. Pirix, come on. Do you have an answer for me on that? Maybe that's different, or confirming, Phil?
Well, the answer is that there's any public funds involved in the project, that there's prevailing wages are required. Also, if you give waivers on fees that would otherwise be charged to a project, there are prevailing wages that would be charged. There are some exceptions with affordable housing projects, so I would need to get back to you to see whether or not any of those would apply to the particular program you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. And then Director Dunsmore, I believe well, why don't you tell me, what are the other options? I'm thinking there's the one where you kind of go homeowner by homeowner and you subsidize, which I think has not been proven to be the most maybe effective at helping the most people. Are we really talking about that one option? Are there other things that we would do with those funds to facilitate low and very low income housing?
Sometimes cities actually use some of these affordable housing funds for creating policies that create more affordable housing units. For example, they use it to administer an affordable housing program and acquire grants and create plans and policies and other programs that make the production of affordable housing more streamlined. So it's not just for the actual development and construction of affordable units, it's program implementation of affordable housing. It's managing the affordable housing units that we have. It takes staff time to manage all of the deed restricted units when they turn over, when they sell, and when they're bought. We have to deal with those deed restrictions, and whether we release them from the program, add to them to the program, and all the recording that happens with the state. So there's a lot of program administration in the background where some of that funding is needed in order to have affordable units in your city. But there is also property acquisition that the city can be working with to buy and sell properties that are allocated for affordable housing for some of these affordable housing builders. So there's a couple different ways, but primarily the most meaningful way is for these nonprofits to be able to rely on some funding and some match funding from communities to be able to construct these higher quality affordable housing projects.
So it sounds like even in that buy-sell scenario, we're still looking at partnering with or selling to someone like a nonprofit who builds these units. So that really is the primary way that we've probably, I would say, in Atascadero at least, seen be the most successful at building that type of product.
Exactly.
Okay.
Other options, just to give you one more, is you can purchase units at market and deed restrict them. You can preserve existing affordable units, so perpetuate a deed restricted unit. Land acquisition, I think Phil mentioned, but most typical is a NOFA, notice of funds available, and you look at who wants to come in and deliver on that project.
Thank you. Let's see. With the point was asked about the west side and how much more building of larger homes might be available out there. And I know we still have a lot of work to do on SB 9 to see how that's going to affect Atascadero and what sort of restrictions we need to put in place for health and safety reasons, and which could potentially limit some of that on the west side. And then there's always you never know if somebody in one of those properties really wants to do that. Those, people who have chosen to live out there on 10 acres and have their home, you do that because they like that, not because they're looking to now, hey, split a lot and get some extra cash. But there certainly could be some of that. Do we see that being, any sort of a issue when it comes to SB 9, but then would spill over into this in terms of looking at these impact fees, or is that not really, do we not really expect to see much of that?
I don't think it's relevant to this type of discussion. We probably are going to see some lot splits and some accessory units built from SB 9. But because of the owner occupancy requirement, you're not going to see a lot of investment because of that. You're going to see folks that they've wanted to do that already because they want to split off a section for their kids or for their other family members, or maybe they're going to move off from their property in 3 years and do that. It will create some housing opportunities, but those particular housing developments are still going to be subject to development impact fees and construction permits and wastewater connections and all these things that are necessary to do it. So it's not as easy and straightforward. It's a little bit of an incentive from the state level to do stuff, but it's not, I don't think it's going to be the windfall I think that some people are fearing.
I agree. A lot have said that, but I'm not talking the ADU piece of it. I'm talking like the splitting the lot, and here you can put a whole nother full unit. So there is a little bit of that potential on the west side if some chose to do that, which then would feed into these larger homes that would in theory be paying.
But a lot of the west side is actually cut out from SB 9 because SB 9 only takes effect in what's called an urbanized area. And that urbanized area boundary actually ends down at about Portola, which cuts out the majority of the upper west side from being eligible for implementation of SB 9. Okay.
All right. Thank you. If we look at what is on the horizon and what is in the pipeline currently, you seem to indicate that you don't, that maybe we couldn't meet all of our low and very low, but I just really want to think about it. Here we are, cycle 6. We have quite a bit in the pipeline, a good number of things that we see coming forward. The state clearly has put together a significant amount of, incentives for developers to build affordable housing. Given all of that, is it possible that we could, because what we're really talking about, we've met our RHNA numbers in the sense that we've done what we need to do as a city. What we're really talking about right now is how do we incentivize and help the private sector to build these units is what we're really saying. And so with what the state incentivizes, with what we've done, with what's coming in the pipeline, without something like these fees, what do you see is possible in terms of the low and very low?
So it's really the very low and extremely low where it's challenging. I think we actually even, most RENA cycles we meet are low. And I think most RENA cycles we actually miss are very low and extremely low. So what we see is there's still going to be a gap for some time, and there still needs to be a program to administer the affordable units that we're going to have going forward, and an opportunity to be a little more complete on that end. What was I going to say?
Can I jump in too, Phil?
Yeah, please do.
So just kind of looking back at our housing element, and there are some things in the pipeline and some assumptions about accessory dwelling units that were put into the housing element. But the housing element went through, and at just looking at the projects in the pipeline, the city had a remaining need for 171 very low units and 95 low income units. And now, while this program alone probably, no, it will not create that many units in the next 8 years, just by virtue of taking a fraction of a fee from each new development that comes in. But the local funding is a great and kind of a critical source to help with that gap financing to make projects work for affordable housing developers. So it's, just part of that capital stack that they have to build in order to get a project to work in locations. And some of the grants that do require local match, this is the way to make that happen. So while it will not necessarily meet all of your target goals, this is a good source to help further you along towards those goals.
I'll also tell you at this point, we've exhausted any affordable housing fees that we've had. We have allocated all of them out to a project that's being proposed by People Self-Help Housing at this point in time. And we do have several other requests waiting, but we're not able to fulfill those. And when we are able to fill those, then we definitely get to have some additional city guidance on some of these, I'll call them higher quality affordable housing projects that go into town.
Well, and it's somewhat ironic that part of the reason we would have this funding gap is because we're getting involved. When I say we, I mean government's getting involved, and therefore the cost of the unit has to be higher, and so the funding gap is higher. So, we've got the project at the north end of town that is the micro homes, and they are doing affordable by design, and anticipating those to be under $400,000, and we're talking about this conception of 3-story stack and pack housing, 900 square feet, and that unit's going to be $585,000. That's a shocking figure. I can't imagine anybody actually paying for that. And how much is the difference between what that actually would be versus if we weren't getting involved and Prevailing Wage wasn't involved, if it was truly free market? And I don't know if we can answer that question, but that's swirling out there for me. The last thing I will ask is, many of us know Chris Thornburg. He's the economist from Santa Barbara, and he does our Central Coast Economic Forecast every year. And something that he talks about regularly is that when it comes to affordable housing, that California is often talking about it wrong. We're trying to subsidize and build these low-income units, which often makes them cost more. And his point is we need to build more higher end units so that people in the middle units can move up, people in the lower units can move up, and you've got this, natural cycle. Part of the argument against that then is that, well, in our area, we are very much a magnet for other people, which many of us on this council are those other people that have moved in from other areas. But some of those people move in from other areas, buy the multi-million-dollar home, and they love living here, and this is great. And they kind of price out of the market, people living here that might be in that middle income home and wanting to move up, but they can't even get it because it keeps being priced out. Is there, if we're moving forward with something here, is there any nexus potential for, people moving out of the area into here that, okay, if you're going to come in and buy the 3,000 square foot home on the 5 acres, or, build your home, the year then, needing to then help to subsidize what we're talking about, that use of services that, if you weren't already here and part of the system and helping to free up the moderate income or the lower income as people are moving up. I don't know if there's a potential there, but I thought I would ask.
Out of town fee. I don't know about that one. But there's certainly, this whole program really has to rely on the carrot and stick kind of scenario, really offering incentives for when we can get affordable by design, really saying, hey, if you're going to build a whole bunch of really big houses that are really expensive, there should be a little bit of a stick to that, a little bit of, hey, we've got to help pay for the other units. I think that's all we're really trying to say here. Could there be other provisions for other scenarios? I think as long as we can create a nexus, we can probably get there. And I would have Genevieve or Ashley answer sort of the original question there, but it's interesting.
I guess it's just something to be food for thought out there.
Yeah, and I think it is an interesting question. And just as a reminder, this is a fee that's charged just on new construction.
Correct.
It's not charged on purchases of existing stock. Okay.
Yeah, understand. Well, we have got a member of the public who has raised his hand up and down about 27 times in the last hour. And so I'm going to make sure he gets his say. Let's go ahead and open up public comment. Any member of the public here on the webinar wishing to speak, go ahead and raise your hand using the raise hand icon. If you are currently on the phone, please press *9. And if you have not yet called in but would like to, please dial 805-538-2888. And with that, public comment is open. I will ask Luke to put our 3-minute timer on. And the first person up will be Mr. Max Zappis.
Hi, thank you for having me tonight. My name is Max Zappis, local real estate broker, developer. Just wanted to call in about this. Very close to heart here. We provide homes in Atascadero. And first of all, I want to say thank you to Heather. A lot of really good questions. The whole council, really good questions. The biggest one was the question of whether or not we have to do this. So that's what I'm hoping for. First thing I want to point out is that the consultants have a conflict of interest here. They make more money by doing more studies, so they're incentivized there to just do more and more. They have no skin in the game locally. They're not really, trying to provide homes or solve this problem. They're simply consulting. The more they consult, the more they make. I just want to point that out. Not a big deal, but just want to point it out. Number two, the biggest thing, the bottom line is the lower we can make the cost of housing production, the more homes will be produced. Everybody gets that. People have commented on it, charging $10,000, charging $15,000, charging $60,000 per home. It just pumps those prices from wherever they were in the $500,000 or $600,000 range up into the $600,000, $700,000 range. So I don't know how that helps the problem. It just makes it worse. Paso, for example, no fees, and they've been nailing it. We've been while we haven't been hitting our low and very low numbers, we've been doing very well on them when you compare them to other cities. That's something people don't really talk about. We've been doing really well when you compare us to other cities. If you compare us to Pismo or Morro Bay, for example, they're hardly building any homes at all. We're building hundreds. We're still hitting the low income, the moderate income, and we have a lot more projects in the pipeline that will hit those very low and low income sections. So the last point is, I just hope we can go with no fees. That's the biggest thing here. We don't ask firefighters to pay more fees if they put out a fire. What we're asking here is for home builders to pay more for every home they build. I don't know why we don't pass a bond. I don't know why we do any other number of measures to get money for this problem. Instead, we're saying, hey, policemen, every time you solve a crime or arrest somebody, we want you to pay an extra fee so that we can hire more of you to do the same thing. It makes no sense. It's a completely illogical solution to the problem. So I just ask that you say no more of this, no more fees. There's already builders retiring right and left. We don't need more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zappas. Next caller or next person on the webinar, if you would please raise your hand or press *9 on the phone. Luke, do we have anyone on the phone wishing to speak?
We do not.
All right. Yeah, I'm tempted to just start randomly calling on members of the public and say, hey, what do you think? I saw, there we go. Ken Triguero, I see you raised your hand. You are next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can you hear me okay? Just doing a sound check.
Yes.
Okay, great. I was having a little trouble there. Sorry. So Ken Triguero from People's Self-Help Housing. So I just wanted to make a couple comments. Folks were questioning that huge cost, and but I can confirm those kind of numbers is what we're seeing out there. We're pretty active. We're a developer in the Central Coast, and we have several projects in the pipeline right now. I provided some of the data for those. I would point out that probably less than half of that total 585 or whatever it was that was shown, probably less than half is the hard cost construction for building. The rest is, the land and the development impact fees, the stormwater. Civil engineering is getting really expensive, and especially in Atascadero, I guess that's the other sort of point to make. In Atascadero, with so much slopes, different terrain and setbacks and oak trees, there's a lot of ADA path of travel, which is important, but it just costs a lot of money. We end up putting a lot of retaining walls that are very expensive, and then a lot of times in Atascadero, we need to build out the offsites, the sidewalks, that kind of thing, and bury the utilities. So I just want to make sure that the council hears that there's definitely some data that can support that. Let's see. The other thing I was just going to point out is the question about prevailing wage. So I would say just in about half of our projects, we're triggering prevailing wage. So as Phil and your city attorney were saying, it's not automatic. There are ways, but maybe more specifically to answer your question, Mayor, in our case, in the jurisdictions where we're utilizing the in lieu fee funds, the affordable housing funds for a project, we normally structure that as a loan to the project, and that does not trigger in itself prevailing wage. So there's a lot of ways that we're doing that. And the other thing to point out about that is right now, there is such, we just don't have any construction labor, or not enough of it, I should say. And that means that the prevailing wage rates are coming closer in line with the market rate. So even if we don't trigger prevailing wage, the labor rates are getting pretty high. Anyway, there's quite a bit going on there. I think that the point was made too about the leveraging capability of the public funding. That just really helps us compete for these funds, and we're using that in several communities. Pismo Beach was mentioned. We're just breaking ground on 50 units next week. We could not have done it without a contribution from the city. They made a relatively small as a portion of the project contribution, but the public, the private equity we brought in was really a result of having the public investment. Thanks for letting me comment.
Thank you, Mr. Triguero. I'm trying to get that name.
That's close enough, yeah.
Thank you, sir. All right, anyone else wishing to speak, please raise your hand or press *9 on the phone. Luke, do you have anyone wishing to speak?
We do not.
All right, last call. Anyone? All right, I will go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to council and staff for a discussion. This is not, to me, this is, I don't love doing this because we've got a situation where every time you charge another fee, you make something more expensive, and it always trickles down. And so I don't think this is a fabulous solution, but it may be a solution that we need to implement. And I certainly want to do it as judiciously and fairly as possible and be very, certainly, something in the neighborhood of 60,000. I think you probably, all of our eyes got super wide, like, are you kidding me? Not acceptable. So I think we want to see what can come out of this, but it's still just, I personally, I don't feel super excited about this type of a tool, and would love to see us be able to do more affordable by design and incentivizing that. And I think as you're bringing this back, I'm hoping that at the same time we can be looking at that next to some of these other options, because looking at this one option, which to me is the least palatable of all of the potential tools we might have, looking at this first and foremost and on its own is a bit challenging to make a decision. And I know we're not making a decision tonight, we're just giving feedback, and I'm sure you're hearing in what I'm saying, where I'm coming from with this. But with that, I certainly want to hear from the rest of my colleagues and have a discussion here. Mayor Pro Tem Newsom, followed by Councilmember Borbo.
As I listen to all of the questions and listening to the conversations and feedback, I want to make sure that the smaller units, I don't want to see larger units benefit and a higher cost be allocated to smaller units. I think that there needs to be an even balance. And I'm afraid that with this tool, it's so large, it's going to increase the density and be something that is making housing less affordable, just because there's so many more larger units going into place as we look at the numbers. So that's my biggest concern. Mine too would be, are we penalizing the existing builders in town because they're paying additional fees that do go into a pot to subsidize larger developments down the line? Or is these affordable housing funds able to be allocated to just a one small project, or whoever applies to it? What are those requirements for getting access to affordable housing money that's put into a big pot? Those are all my thoughts for now, and thanks for the great questions, colleagues. I got all my questions answered, including the ADU, so thank you.
Councilmember Borbo.
I just wanted to perhaps re-clarify for myself and perhaps others. We have our existing inclusionary program where if it requires a council action, if a project requires a council action, you either have to include in your project some affordable housing, or you have to pay an in lieu of fee. Premise here is that we would establish, is the premise here that we would establish a fee that would apply to what now are by right developments? Okay, so you're saying yes. So bottom line is, if I own a vacant, or I'm interested in buying a vacant 2.5 acre lot on the west side right now, that's a by right. There'd be a by right development of a single family home on that property. There would be no affordable housing fee, but under this we would be saying, okay, you want to build a home out there, 2,500 square feet or whatever, you're now going to be subject to this brand new fee imposed by the city of Atascadero.
Keep in mind that the council could choose any parameter to implement this fee. It could be only certain by right projects. It could be all by right projects. It could be, houses over 5,000 square feet, for example. There's any parameter you could make. But I will also tell you that the state is taking away our ability to have discretion on projects. All of these residential projects now, these larger residential projects, whether they're multifamily projects or even small lot subdivisions, are going to become non-discretionary. They're going to become by right. And all we can do is apply objective design standards. So in the past, these projects required rezoning, they required council action. Therefore, we had this opportunity to implement our program. In the future, we won't have that opportunity. They will be by right projects. So we have to look at ways where we can still implement some kind of an affordable housing program on a by right housing project.
But the same question would apply also to the multifamily. So right now, if I'm a developer and I happen to to find a 2-acre multifamily zone piece of property in Atascadero, by right entitlement to build X number of units, perhaps even more with state incentives. I don't have to pay any affordable housing fee or do any build any affordable units because it's by right. But under this program, if we went with like A or B, we would actually be charging an affordable housing fee for somebody developing multifamily units. So I mean,
Yes, unless you chose to, as a matter of policy, to exempt those units.
okay, because I mean, that goes to Mr. Zappas's point, which is simply, you don't make affordable housing by making housing more expensive. And then potentially collect a pot of money that you turn around, and if you give it to somebody to use, in many circumstances would impose the prevailing wage. It's going to increase the cost, although as Mr. Triguero noted, that gap is probably narrowing with the labor market right now. But it's like, okay, we're going to impose this extra cost, collect a pot of money, give it to somebody who's going to build a more expensive project because of government requirements. It's like a circle of illogic, and that doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I don't like the idea of imposing a new fee on property owners, let's say, but if there's anything to be said here, it would be for, if you're going to build a very large house, create a demand for services that'll be filled by relatively lower income people who are struggling to find housing. That might be the only place I could mentally justify doing that. But to impose it on multifamily, to me, it's completely self-defeating, it seems like to me.
Are you complete, Councilmember Warbo? Councilmember Funk.
Yeah, thanks. I'm with you on the illogic, and I think this is a good point to be discussing. Why would we need to do this, and what are we doing this for? To me, I'm looking at a couple of things. One is that I'm uncomfortable with a fairness issue that's in our existing inclusionary housing policy, where developments that are of higher density, that are closer in, that are going to be naturally tending to be more affordable, are required to meet these inclusionary policies. But your 5,000 square foot home on the west side that's a single property is not. And that makes me uncomfortable. And as we move forward in a process where the state is creating ways for us to streamline the process, which this is a good thing to be able to have streamlining, to have developers know that they can move through housing projects quickly, that to have that process take away most of the points of council discretion, so that we have we're left with a nonsensical and unfair set of selected projects that are required to meet these requirements and pay something or build something in inclusionary housing, and other projects that, as Councilmember Bourbeau just mentioned, create substantial demand for service jobs, are not picking up their share of the load. So I think we could, in principle, do something that would be more fair by taking this approach. And then the other question for me is it effective? And I think the kinds of things that we might want to be doing with this money are the kinds of things that we have been doing with our current policy in inclusionary, in terms of things like the People's Self-Help project. That project is one that will build permanent supportive housing in low and very low income. It will house a number of veterans in a set aside, and we have deep need for that kind of housing to get people off the streets and out of the park and out of the creek and into to a supportive environment where they have a chance to get themselves, get their life back together and become more productive members of society over time. And we have some members of our community who have such substantial damage, or difficulty with their physical or mental health, or injuries and problems over time that or intellectual disabilities or other things that make them not able to function in the community if they have permanent supportive housing, and otherwise not be able to function in the community. So we need projects like this. We need this People's Self-Help project to go through, and it hasn't penciled out in part because we don't have a lot of money we kick into it. So that is, there are needs that we have to meet with these kinds of funds. We need to be judicious about how we spend this money. And we need to be fair and strategic in how we collect these funds. So in principle, I think that this might be an approach that over time could be done more fairly than our existing inclusionary housing policy. And I'm inclined to proceed in considering some options, with, a lot of big caveats. I don't think we need to give any incentive for areas targeted for infill. That's where everybody wants to build housing. No, doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that, I think we need to be very careful about creating an incentive if we exempt replacements, that we don't get that gentrification type of effect that I asked about earlier. I have no interest in paying for that. We want to, give a pretty generous exemption for, or discount for units that are affordable by design, because that's meeting a critical need for workforce housing already. And we don't want to make that any harder. Max has a real point there. But I think we can, if this is modest and judicious, we can meet important needs with this approach and do it fairly. I'm still a bit reluctant to weigh in on a particular type of these approaches. I kind of like the idea of having unit size as a threshold. So basically, if we exempt the smallest units and we have something that's for the 2,000 foot and under, and then something, an additional, a different look at houses that are above 2,000 square feet. In the language of our report, and in the slide that Ashley put up and discussed with the pros and cons of different ones, the regular sort of con was, oh, well, this might be, if you go with a scaled approach, you might end up having a dollars per square foot for big homes that's a whole lot less than $1 per square foot for a little home because of the effect of a maximum. But I'm also hearing the maximum could be, is likely to be much larger than we would be willing to support. I mean, this shouldn't be onerous. This needs to be modest. And so I'm not too worried about that, that concern. We have latitude to do something that would appropriately reflect the kinds of demands on service sector employees that a really big property that needs, extra support entails. and that we can let those properties shoulder some of that burden now where they are currently exempt from it, and be able to meet a niche for people who need a lot of help, that we, where we need to try to get a balanced set of housing in our community.
Are you complete?
I am complete.
Thank you. Other council members? I think Councilmember Dares, we haven't heard from you as a wrap up.
Well, yeah, I'll just kind of chime in again. I was so focused on these 5 different options and how we can mix and match and whatever, trying to figure out how the fee structure for this is going to help incentivize building affordable housing. And then it suddenly occurred to me that we're adding a fee to something that's already very expensive. The $60,000 range is not it's not a lie. I mean, it is. You build something that's 751 square feet, it's going to be a huge impact fee, all the fees that are going to go into it. So I can appreciate the concept of wanting to raise funds to be able to subsidize affordable housing down the road in certain circumstances for people self-help and whatever it is. But I'm not sure that this is necessarily the way to do it. I think that if there are other ways of exempting fees and things that we can do to incentivize building affordable housing, I think I'd like to look into it, look at those options a little bit closer, because adding fees, making it more expensive to build is not going to make it easier. So this has been a good discussion, but I think we have a long way to go. So I'm finished.
Thank you, Councilmember. So any other last comments? All right. So I think what you're hearing from us, and please, if there's any questions of clarification, Ashley, Genevieve, Phil, please let us know. But I think what you're hearing and what we said originally too, affordable by design, these things, all of these other things that we can do. And this is kind of a last resort. And it may be necessary. It sounds like it probably is, to help fund some of these things like People's Self-Help Housing and other organizations that do bring an important product to Atascadero for residents that need it. And they've done a really good job. They have a very good reputation. And I'm sure there are others are out there. They're just with whom we have the most experience. And I think what you're hearing from a lot of us is, a fairness to it, to add fees to, your low income or your affordable by design, or even your somewhat moderate homes, it doesn't quite seem right. And so just really paying attention to that piece of it. This is a tough one. You can see we're wrestling with it a bit. And I would ask the three of you, Jake as well, the four of you, do you have any questions of clarification, or have we been clear enough?
I was sincere when I said it helps me to hear you wrestle with these issues. This is a study that involves a lot of trade-offs, and you've noted a lot of them. And I'm hearing the main takeaways, and we will be checking in. We will be checking in. We won't go too far without making sure we get some more direction from you. So I appreciate it. I don't have any further questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Barbose, or something else?
Yeah. Yes, there is. I'd like to clarify. I think after considering it all, opposed to the idea of a charging fee other than potentially on large square footage units. But what the question I have, or what I'd like between staff and the consultants to potentially address and coming back, is if we adopt a fee, we're collecting a pot of money. What I'd like to understand is the alternatives for spending that money, not specific or down in the weeds stuff, but we talked about two primary examples, ones that trigger prevailing wage, and you essentially use your money to pay for something more expensive, and you haven't produced any more units. Versus things like Mr. Triguero mentioned, like lending money to people's self-help, which then enables them to qualify for other federal, subsidies, credits, et cetera. I'd like to understand before we impose a fee is what are the options for expending it, that where you get the most bang for your buck. If you create a pot of money, I wanted to be able to understand that that pot of money could be used to really facilitate the creation of more affordable kinds of units.
All right. I think this has been a good discussion. And Ashley, I did take you at your word when you said you wrestling with it. So we did it. All right. Well, thank you very much. We're going to move on to our next item, but I would like us to take maybe a brief break.
Yes.
My council would probably like that. All right. It's 8 o'clock. Why don't we come back? Do we need 10 minutes or do you want to take a 5? Give me a 10 minutes. You got it. Yeah. Whoever speaks first. All right. I'll see y'all in 10. right, I think we're just about ready to get going again. Wait for everybody to come on screen who's ready. Councilmember Funk, it may be that you're just wanting to remain off camera for a moment. I am going to go ahead and get started. There you are. All right. Well, the council's just returning from a short break, and we are now moving on to our second management report, C2, the Emergency Evacuation Traffic Planning Study. And this will be our Fire Chief, Casey Bryson.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So tonight's management report is the Emergency Evacuation Traffic Planning Study. And this is a receive for the council and ask questions, provide any input that you have for staff, and we'll go ahead and make the presentation. So I'll just give a brief introduction, and then I'll be turning it over to Steve Weinberger, who I have here on screen. He is the senior principal with W-Trans and is the author of the report. So in just a moment, I'll pass the presentation over to him, and he'll be able to share his screen. So just real quick background tonight, we're going to be going over this evacuation traffic planning study. This really is a progress report on a council goal back from about 2019. The 2019-21 Atascadero action plan had a goal in there to ensure comprehensive safety readiness and risk mitigation. And one of the big components of that was to develop and work on and present to the public a comprehensive evacuation and communications plan. So we went to work in 2019 after that action plan came out, put our heads together, pretty much all departments here in the city. And what we found was that there were not very many companies doing this type of thing, but one that was just starting after some of the devastating fires that took out parts of Santa Rosa and Paradise was a company called Zone Haven. They were really the first one and to work on these smart evacuation zones that allow people to, first responders, to be on the same page with the public. So we were one of the first cities. Actually, there was maybe 2 or 3 counties, a handful of cities that had already signed on with Zone Haven. We were one of the first. I just looked today and they have 13 counties or just under 7 million people now. And I'm happy to announce also that San Luis Obispo County, I think we mentioned this at a council meeting or 2 ago, that San Luis County will be, hopefully that's the 14th county, but they'll be starting in January. So that's exciting news. So anyways, I did give a presentation to council on Zone Haven back in January, but it has been a few months. So just real briefly, we have these smart evacuation zones, 27 of them throughout the city. The internet platform is broken up into the emergency management side and then the community side. And in the emergency management side, all first responders have basically a common picture. We can store data in there such as population, number of cars, traffic control points, special considerations like one-way streets or narrow bridges, and basically gives us a common picture with law enforcement, county OES, city EOC. So internally, if it's our fire and police, dispatch, city EOC all on the same page, but also outside resources coming in to help, because we would need help from throughout the county on this type of event. It does recommendations for evacuations. So this platform will make a recommendation on the number of zones to be evacuated based on up-to-date weather and traffic inputs. So it really is a robust system, and we implemented in 2020. It is has been ready to use for this fire season. So we've trained on it. We've put out public education campaigns. We put a billboard on the freeway. We've sent mailers. We have put it on social media. But basically the 2 campaigns were Know Your Zone, and the second one was Hear the High Low, Time to Go, which is really tied to what happens when we can't use our phones and social media. Can we activate the evacuation via a high-low siren placed in patrol cars, public works vehicles, fire engines, sirens sound, and we get the message out, hear the high-low, time to go. So again, I'm excited that this will be countywide. The entire county first responder community will all be on the same platform. So when someone comes in from an outside community, they will have all this data that I mentioned before. So really that brought us to our next step. And we wanted to know, we've already talked about the previous management report, some of the intricacies of Atascadero and our roads, far west side, the ability to get people out. So do these smart evacuation zones work? And really that question that we wanted to ask a traffic engineer is, how long will it take to evacuate some of these zones or multiple zones? Would contraflow work for us? Could we get one street turned both lanes go in the same direction and get people out quicker that way? Will it work here? Can we increase traffic movement by changing traffic signals using manual traffic control, or even closing some sections? Could we move traffic quicker? So that really, that's maybe a lengthy introduction, but that's where we're here. We have Steve Weinberger on with W-Trans, and he's got his study done, and we're excited to turn it over to him. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks. Can y'all hear me okay? Great. Yeah, I've been working with Casey for a while on this. We have a draft report out, which I think is part of your staff report. Just so you know, the doing traffic engineering for fire evacuation is a new thing. We haven't seen much out there that gets really in depth on the traffic engineering operations of evacuations like this. But we've used some traffic engineering processes and theories to create this evaluation and recommendations. And I've also kind of used my experience. I've actually done traffic work for the town of Paradise, for the city of Chico, and have interviewed staff from both those cities on the day that they had the fire. There's lots of discussions in newspaper articles about their traffic there. So I know lots of stories. Talked directly to the public works director who was out directing traffic. So I kind of got that input, as well as I'm a resident of Sonoma County and have been evacuated a couple times myself. So I've kind of seen firsthand what some of the pitfalls or other opportunities are when evacuating. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and get to the presentation. Okay. So I think Casey covered this already in terms of what our focus was, evaluating the evacuation routes, anticipated volume, and coming up with recommendations, either closures, signal timing, contraflow lanes, and I'll get into all of that. So these are your 27 zone haven zones. And in working with the fire department, the chief provided me with assumptions on sort of 3 scenarios that we would evaluate. And each 3 scenarios is in a different color, and each scenario assumed that 3 zones would evacuate. And under each scenario, we'd assume a different wind condition. So scenarios A and B, the orange or purple group of zones, we would assume a westerly wind, a wind that's coming from the west and pushing everybody to evacuate to the east. So we assume that traffic would seek destinations on 101 to the north and to the south, and to Highway 41 to the east. I can tell you offhand that there are a lot of other routes to take, but to be conservative, we decided to focus on the primary routes, and kind of worst case that everybody takes these primary routes, the routes that they normally would take on a daily basis. If people take other sort of minor road routes, that's great. It kind of spreads the demand out, but let's assume worst case, and the majority of people stay focused on the routes they would normally get onto 101. So A and B kind of assume this westerly wind pushing them to the east. Scenario 3 in green assumed that there'd be an easterly wind sort of pushing them to the west. So those were our 3 conditions that we tested. Not sure if you can read the numbers. I'll read them to you. As Casey mentioned, the Zone Haven has information on each zone in terms of the number of structures, population, number of vehicles. We assume the number of vehicles that were in that database. Our scenario A, the orange group, had 1,980 vehicles in those 3 zones. Scenario B, the purple, 3,900, almost 4,000, and scenario C, the green, 4,800. Okay, so obviously closer to the population areas, more vehicles, more vehicles in the higher density zones. So we tested different volumes of vehicles evacuating. So what routes would people take? We put together a series of maps, and these are in our draft report. And I'll kind of go into detail on just scenario A, and then not spend too much time on B and C because the process is the same. But for each scenario, we took each zone and then developed paths of travel to get traffic to 101 North, 101 South, Highway 41. And the thing about Atascadero, in my experience working for the last 12 years or so, is what I know and what most everybody else knows in terms of traffic, in terms of Highway 101, is you have a lot of interchanges. You have more than the city of your size, your population. I would say you have more interchanges per capita than anybody else in the state. But the thing about those interchanges, as you know, is they're all narrow 2-lane overpasses or underpasses in some case, except for Highway 41. 41 has a little more capacity. Most of the other interchanges have 2 lanes with no turn lanes to turn onto the freeway. So it's a bad formula for traffic congestion with no turn lanes and low capacity intersections. So we had to take that into account, and what we did is we tried to use as many of those interchanges as possible that seem feasible on travel routes. So you'll see the 3 zones in scenario A. The specific colors don't mean anything other than just we use different colors to sort of separate out different paths of travel. And we assigned traffic to all the different various routes to get them to 101 and Highway 41. And we did that for each zone. I'll just point out to you on these maps, you'll see traffic signals where the signalized intersections are located. And you'll see these are actually red stop signs. And what those are is always stop controlled intersections. And we're showing those because that's the lowest capacity you can have at an intersection, is when you have every approach stop. And in the case of a mass exodus with everybody taking the same route, with everybody stopping, that can lead to a lot of congestion. So we wanted to target those locations in the analysis. So each scenario, we develop paths. We then have spreadsheets, and these are in the Appendix B of your draft report for every zone. And you'll see here's scenario A. Here we have our 3 zones. We laid out sort of the routes that each path would take. And then I mentioned earlier, okay, scenario A had 1,900 vehicles total in those 3 zones. Well, for each zone, we assigned a certain route of travel to take a certain percentage of the trips. We assumed about 75% of the vehicles would go to 101, 25% to Highway 41. So you'll see, for example, Highway 41 at El Camino Real gets 25% of the total vehicles in that zone. And then we have different routes to 101 North, 101 South, again, using as many interchanges as possible. This is the combined scenario A, those three zones, the combined paths. You'll see traffic seeking to get on 101 at various points. You'll see traffic. Well, what you're not seeing is we're not showing the path going beyond the point of 101 or beyond Highway 41, but that's the intent of this, is we assume that traffic is continuing on. So then we used a program to then use our percent distribution for each path, the amount of traffic, and then let this program do all the accounting of turning movements at each of the key intersections. And I'll get to our evaluation of those in a sec. So that was scenario A. Scenario B, we went through the same process, developed paths, kind of laid out each of the paths, assigned a certain percentage of the vehicles using that route, and then used our program to then do the accounting of the amount of traffic. Again, scenario C, same process. Here's the combined scenario C. Okay, so then at that point, we took those volumes, and we have data from past traffic studies, and which we gathered up and put into our intersection evaluation software. And we looked at sort of a weekday PM peak hour condition, what you're used to seeing in traffic studies and EIRs of intersection analysis, where intersections operate at a level service A through F, and to see how intersection operations changed with that added traffic. And now we assumed that, with Casey and I talking, decided that we would assume this evacuation was happening when you have your highest volume of traffic of the day out on the road already in the afternoon commute hour. And then we would evacuate all this traffic on top of that. So we're taking weekday PM peak hour traffic volumes, adding the evacuation traffic on top of it, and then seeing how these intersections react to the added traffic in terms of added delay and congestion, intersections failing. So I just put together these brief tables, and you'll see highlighted in red. We had these intersections on scenario A go to a level of service F, so we have the significant congestion. Those in blue are going to a level of service E, not as bad, but still congestion going on. Scenario B, again, we had more vehicles in scenario B evacuating, so you'll see more red intersections going to red. And then scenario C, which had the most amount of vehicles evacuating, you'll see the most intersections going to level service F. So at that point, we went to develop recommendations, and our strategy for accommodating this evacuating traffic was, well, we wanted to increase the capacity for that evacuating traffic at those one-on-one interchanges where they're trying to get on the freeway, where now you see congestion happening already during your peak hour. What happens if we start adding more traffic coming to those interchanges? Well, we wanted to make sure we created some capacity for them to get them a free route out without having a lot of delay. We wanted to make sure that your intersections that are, say, operated with traffic signals have some type of increased vehicle capacity. And a lot of the times, if you put a police officer at a traffic signal, he can squeeze more traffic out in an hour than the traffic signal can, because he can be more reactive to where more cars are, and a human out there can just get more traffic going than the signal. So we wanted to use that at key locations, and then especially at those always stop controlled intersections I mentioned, especially because you have a lot of those in those residential neighborhoods where people may be trying to evacuate. is we want to identify sort of key always stop controlled intersections where we really need to crank up more capacity. And that's with manual traffic control, with a police officer out there moving traffic along without having them stop. So in terms of 101, as I said, we try to utilize as many interchanges as possible. That's what the city has, and it's on in terms of benefit is you have a lot of interchanges. They're not a lot of high capacity interchanges, but you have a lot of them. Let's take advantage of that. And in order to increase capacity, our recommendation is to close the off ramps at these key interchanges, so nobody can get off and use those. And we would close traffic coming to those interchanges from the other side of the freeway, the side that is not in peril trying to evacuate. So for those first two scenarios that are on the west side, we would close some interchanges off so the east side of town can't use them. So essentially we create these on-ramps with no other traffic getting off, nobody taking up capacity, just a free path for traffic to get on the freeway and get out of town. I mentioned the signal operations, manual traffic control, and those key outlets from neighborhoods providing manual traffic control. I'm going to show you this graphically on a map. So we did develop recommendations for each of those three scenarios. We have these maps. They're at the end of the report that give you specifics on where we would do road closures, where we would provide manual traffic control. Those are the diamonds. Where signal operations might change. The solid yellow, for example, is going to flashing yellow. I'm going to zoom in here and then zoom in on the southern half. So this is scenario A. We'll start up at Del Rio and work our way south. So we expect traffic. We'll use Del Rio interchange. And as I said, the road closures, we'd close the two off ramps. We'd close Del Rio Road just on the west side of El Camino Real. So traffic can flow on El Camino Real from this side of town, but can't get to that. Because what we've done now, and by turning these signals into a flashing yellow, all this traffic has no conflicts. It comes to the interchange. It can turn left to go northbound. It can turn right to go southbound with no other traffic taking up its capacity. So we've really cranked up the capacity by doing that. You'll see San Anselmo, same thing. We've closed San Anselmo Road just on the east side of west side of El Camino, closed the off ramps. There's no traffic signals there, so we don't need to put them in flashing, but we do have an always stop controlled here at San Anselmo and Monterey Road, and we would recommend a police officer there directing traffic to keep traffic moving. Okay, and that southern half, sort of the same pattern you see, Traffic Way, State Route 41, Curb Rail, Santa Rosa Road. We would make use of all these interchanges, closing off ramps, closing the interchange to the side of town that is not in peril, and create these free routes, free paths without any conflicts. You'll see a number of locations in these diamonds where we have always stop controls that we really need to increase capacity there. Here's the 41 corridor, and we would use signal operations there, some with manual traffic control, some just in flashing yellow. So we did that for each of the three scenarios. It's really sort of a repeating pattern of creating capacity at the 41 interchanges. So scenario B, pretty much the same set at Del Rio and San Anselmo. We wouldn't go as far south under this just because the way these zones are located, a little more circuitous to get to this side of town. We may have traffic going that way, and that's fine. It'll spread the traffic out, but we're trying to focus as much capacity where the traffic would normally go. And then C, sort of the same thing, but on C, you'll see we're now closing the west side of town to that interchange. So all traffic via Del Rio Road or El Camino can get to the interchange, but no off-ramp traffic and no traffic from the west side of town. Same thing at San Anselmo, and same thing here through the 41 interchange. So some things I wanted to note, those manual traffic control, we have a long list of locations that would need manual traffic control, but we've created a priority list. We know that staffing can be an issue, so we want to make sure we gave priority in terms of which intersections were more or less important in a situation like this. Casey mentioned the contraflow lane approach. So this was approach, by the way, that the city of Paradise used when it evacuated. Its primary one access to Highway 99 that day was what's called the Skyway, and it's a 4-lane, separated 4-lane highway that goes down the hill into Chico. And that day, the city turned those 4-lane, 2-way road, 4 lanes into 4 lanes, 1-way, all heading down into Chico. And I'll tell you, people talk about the traffic congestion, and what happened that day was once those 4 lanes got into Chico, it had to merge back into 2 to get to Highway 99 and the way the ramps are oriented. And that merge area just started backing up the hill back into Paradise. So we kind of considered the contraflow lane approach, but again, every path that is a viable evacuation route leads to, those 101 approaches all have sort of single lane on ramps. And what we didn't want was sending a 2-lane road, make it a 1-way, and then have traffic merge at sort of the critical point. So we did not recommend the contraflow lane approach. What we are recommending is sort of like use all these interchanges and close off ramps and make them high capacity. So, which gets probably to, I know a question on everybody's mind in terms of planning for this is how much time do you need to evacuate? What's the evacuation time of this? And I've been hesitant to answer that question because there's a lot of uncertainty in just projecting that travel time for evacuation with the tools we have. I mean, what is the background traffic on the road going to be like? Are there going to be other zones evacuating besides these 3, whether they've been told to evacuate or not? What are the traffic conditions on 101? Are they going to allow for that free flow onto 101? Is there going to be a backup on 101? Were all those recommendations I make followed? There's a lot of variables, a lot of uncertainty, but let's kind of take a shot at going through the math here. So I've kind of laid out each of the 3 scenarios that we evaluated, and you'll see the first line of each set is sort of normally, and then under evacuation. So scenario A, the average travel distance to get to 101 for those 3 zones was 4.4 miles. One thing I didn't tell you is we use Google Maps. We would had my engineer go on Google Maps at 4:30 in the afternoon and look at these travel paths in terms of how much time it takes, what Google Maps tells us in terms of travel time. So these travel times and speeds are based on what Google Maps is calculating during the PM peak hour. So scenario A, 4.4 miles at 25 miles an hour takes 10 minutes. Well, how much time is it going to take on evacuation time? It's difficult to project, but I can tell you if we say, all right, just assume it takes, that traffic is going to be traveling at 2 miles an hour for those 4.4 miles. All right, that's a little over 2 hours of travel time. I'm not telling you it's going to be 2 miles an hour. I'm just showing you what the math is by picking a speed out of the air here. These other 2, which are closer to 101, about 2 miles of travel, normally takes 5 minutes at 24 to around 25 miles an hour. Okay, at 2 miles an hour, that distance takes about 60 minutes. Assuming Highway 101 has capacity available to receive all this traffic, then what the recommendations we make should get you higher than a 2 mile an hour speed for this evacuating traffic. So if you're asking me how much time should we assume, I'm projecting it's not going to be worse than 2 miles an hour. So assume, like, if you're traveling 4 miles, it's going to take may take a couple hours. So why don't you start evacuating traffic 4 hours before, for example? That if you go through the math, those aren't numbers that we've used a very sophisticated traffic model to project. This is just using some simple numbers to make some assumptions. So that is our presentation, and I'm sure you have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Weinberg. It's really exciting to be at this point right now. As you said, back in 2009, we said, one of our priorities is that comprehensive, safety readiness. And so here we are 2 years later, we've already implemented Zone Haven, and much thanks and appreciation goes to you, Chief, and your team for bringing this to us, being innovative in your approach and finding a company that was on the cutting edge of this and implementing this, and then taking it, of course, to the county. And now this is going to be countywide. So it's exciting to see this come to fruition, because those of us on council don't always see the actions that we take and the policies that we make take such quick effect. And this is relatively quick effect. So it's pretty exciting. So with that, let's look for any council questions that we have. And I'm sure there's some of us, Councilmember Bourbeau, who might be curious about a lot of things. But I know Councilmember Bourbeau, and he'll ask some of those outside of this too. So Councilmember Bourbeau, go right ahead.
Sure. No, actually, I'm glad to go first because I thought the report was excellent. And as I thought of a question, it was answered within the report. So a great job on that. I was curious about one thing you mentioned was staffing. So when I saw the idea of, you're going to have people out there manually controlling traffic because it's more efficient. Maybe wonder about staffing with a small police department. I suppose you could throw public works guys out there at it, that sort of thing. But I assume that in a major event like this, there would be mutual aid in the form of law enforcement officers, others. So is staffing for those traffic control measures actually a problem to be concerned about, or is it something that would, as an event developed, would kind of take care of itself?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in on that. So that really gets us into our next step. The logistics to do some of those traffic measures on the 101 is huge, right? So really, we started the conversation already last week with Caltrans, and started with CHP. We didn't actually meet with them, but we did meet with the sheriff's office. So coming up with that list, that prioritization list, we're going to have to use outside partners. We're going to have to use multiple CHP, Caltrans to man barricades. So we're right now kind of interpreting that data and how many people and what kind of systems we need to set up and how to prioritize it. And we've got the contacts, we've got the people in the room, and we'll be working on what that request looks like. How many, if our APD is running the evacuation and managing it, how many officers are they requesting through CHP and SO? So that's really our next step, is coming up with those numbers and having a level too of, okay, we're, trigger points where we need to order big or order small kind of thing. So that's really our next step.
Thank you. That's it.
Other questions? Councilmember Funk, followed by Councilmember Darras.
Yes, I want to first echo the mayor's comments that this is really exciting, and we're very proud that you for pursuing this and moving this council objective forward from 2019 to now, and I think with a sense of urgency about the safety of our community. Let me start. You mentioned, Steve, that assuming that the 101 has capacity, is there enough capacity on the 101 if we're flooding traffic through these intersections at top speed by taking away all of the cross traffic? Is there capacity to move people out at that pace? Or does that even if we close off the 101 to traffic coming from the Paso Robles areas or for coming up the grade, and prioritize Atascadero evacuation traffic entirely?
As the chief mentioned, city's already started discussions with Caltrans, and them and the CHP would be partners in coming up with solutions for 101 to create that capacity. Frankly, it wasn't part of our this initial analysis to start looking at 101 operations, but consider that we're looking at our background traffic was looking at weekday PM peak, so people coming home. So a heavier northbound 101 flow, where we're sending probably more traffic to go 101 southbound towards San Luis Obispo, and some northbound as well. And on an evacuation, people tend to where they go. If you want to get them out of the immediate area, let's assume they're getting out of Atascadero. Where are they going? They're likely going to where where evacuation centers are. We don't know where those are. It could be the fairgrounds, could be Cal Poly area. A lot of people tend to go to relatives or friends' house. More population to the south of you in the county than the north, so we're sending more traffic to the south, and so we don't know what a time of day that's going to occur. But I think the key thing is coordinating with Caltrans and the CHP to create, closures and conditions that capacity exists to get that traffic out of the immediate area.
Okay. With all of those different control points, as we were just discussing, and in a it can take time before all of the mutual aid arrives, and some of them have to come from some distance. Is there any reason that city staff in a wide variety of roles couldn't be cross-trained to manage the first couple of hours of manual traffic control at intersections until our mutual aid arrives to relieve them?
Yeah, I would say I'll jump in on that one. I think we will look at entirely. We'll definitely be utilizing, on top of our police department, our public works department, our operations folks out in the field. And I think, some of those areas closing off El Camino to the 101, that'll be perfect locations for those that aren't out necessarily in the path of the peril that's coming towards town. But we'll definitely be looking at all the resources we have available to us.
That seems like a good opportunity to get a lot of staffing quickly. In the data that you did this part, one of the key intersections is that intersection at State Route 41 and El Camino Real. Has the recent traffic work that Caltrans has been doing in that quarter and in that intersection materially changed the throughput capacity of that intersection? And do these numbers reflect the new reality or the old one?
If you're talking about the work that's, I am. Okay. If you're talking about the work that's been done by Caltrans here in the last year or two, 41, and I was there in July and kind of took a look at what's been done. It's been mainly sort of ADA improvements. And from what I've seen, there's not been any substantial change to vehicle capacity on 41 up through the El Camino intersection. So that's what we assumed in our analysis is what has been there for the last 3 to 5 years. Actually longer than that, since the interchange was improved. We worked on the Highway 41 corridor study, so we had a lot of data for it and know those intersections very well, and have made recommendations on the 41 study. But we did not. There's been no substantial change to capacity there, vehicle capacity.
Okay, so we're up to date.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Under what kind of circumstances, and this is probably a Casey question, but under what circumstances would you need to see something the equivalent of scenario A and scenario B happening at the same time? And how much if you have a really big event that requires 5 or 6 zones to evacuate pretty much in the same time period, is that the kind of event we would have a fair amount of notice for, or something that might develop real quickly?
That's a great question. That's going to be really hard to describe or to figure out the exact answer. I kind of like it. There's two scenarios I really have pictured in my head, and one is the Highway 41 fire from 1994, and that started out by Cerro Alto campground, and it kind of marched slowly towards town, and then it kind of just skirted the city limits and headed south down the 101. And in that case, we can be very systematic. We can evacuate zone by zone or multiple zones at a time, but we can do it in a very systematic way to move people and in a timely manner, but not overfill those intersections. Now the scary one is like Paradise, which Steve already talked about, and that was a fire that blew through town early in the morning before people were up, and you basically have a firestorm for all intents and purposes. And in that case, we wouldn't be doing a systematic. We may just trying to stay ahead of the fire, which is basically what they did. And we're going to be doing more high-low time to go siren, more door to door, trying to keep in front of the event. Maybe we've notified multiple zones all at once, but we're really it's kind of a more all hands on deck and just trying to get in there and get people out and as quickly as possible. So it's not that systematic zone by zone type evacuation. That scenario is, I hate to say it's a little more unlikely, but we do not typically have the weather. I'm not saying that we can't, but we typically do not have that strong east wind that blows, at those extreme mile per hour levels for hours. Typical that you hear a sundowner or Santa Ana, Southern California, or and have them up in Northern California as well. But our topography doesn't typically give us that type of a wind pattern. So that scenario isn't as likely in my mind to occur for Atascadero, but we do have to be thinking about that with these zones.
And do we learn from this anything about circumstances in which we might need to ask people in zones that are closer to the freeway not to evacuate yet, and so that people who are further up Graves or Del Rio or Santa Lucia Road can get out in a fire that's coming in from the west?
Yeah, that's a really good point. We could look into that. I think, you're not going to get everybody leaving just by saying it's a mandatory evacuation either. And some zones might be on a warning. So we might be able to be very communicative in that some are mandatory and those ones need to go right now. The others are on a watch or a warning. And those ones, leave if you choose, but here's some good direction on, head south, but not necessarily right this moment for those other zones. So I think that's a good point that we could probably craft into our wording on evacuation. And we can add that information on the community platform side of the zone haven. So the zone would have that information that either stay put, you're on notice or warning rather, or you're time to go kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there may be sometimes where we have to look after each other in order to get everybody out. God forbid that we have to actually do this, but I mean, we're planning for it. And then I also noticed in the detail, is it correct to say that in all of the scenarios, people in town would still be able to cross the freeway at Santa Barbara Road and at Santa Cruz and San Ramon?
That's right. Yeah, I didn't mention that much, but the idea, our assumptions were, you got to leave interchange in town open at the north end and south end. Say you close everything except Santa Barbara and Santa Cruz, because any traffic on 101 that's say coming to Atascadero, we want to give it an interchange or two to get off. So they're part of the recommendations are work with Caltrans, CHP, have freeway signs, Atascadero bound traffic exit Santa Barbara. And you have Santa Barbara and El Camino Real to serve that if say the fire is on the west side. So yeah, the intention is not to close everything in town, just those critical interchanges where we're trying to get traffic out, then have maybe bookend interchanges that we can have the traffic be served.
Okay, so one takeaway from this is that people who work in one part of town or shop or do other things, recreate, whatever, in one area of town on one side of the freeway and have kids or elderly parents or elderly neighbors that they might need to help evacuate that are on the other side of the freeway should make sure that they know how to get from the places where they normally hang out back to home using one of those two interchanges and not anything in the middle. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think this is probably a good sort of topic that the chief and I maybe should discuss further. Under all these fire events, you do get folks that want to get, even though they're in a mandatory evacuation zone, aren't there at the time and want to get back into it. And I think it maybe gets to more sort of police and fire policy on letting, will that traffic be allowed to go back in? Number one, are you at a mandatory evacuation state and will you let traffic back in, first of all? And what's the public education process on dealing with children or people that are left at home? I think that's more of a sort of chief, that's I think more your realm. If you want to chime in.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to account for that, right? We talked about time of fire and the worst case of traffic on the road, but there also might be kids in school and parents coming from work to get kids at home. Maybe it's summer, kids are at home, so they're coming from work to get the kids. So we have to account for all that, and that's going to be Chief Masterson and I will be putting our heads together and we will be figuring out how we let people get to their kids, because we just have to make that happen. So
okay, so yeah, so in the next steps of this, will consideration of those kinds of issues and public communication around how to plan for this so that your life can work and your people can be safe, given what we're going to do with the roads. Is that going to be part of the process, and at what point?
Yeah, I mentioned the next step of talking to our county and state partners, kind of coming up with that plan to work well with them. But the next part of that really is the communication and testing and making sure that we can get the word out. So we've got plans we need to really to work on, we need to activate a zone in test mode, right? And see who gets the word. So we need to send it all out. This is a test. This is some way to contact us and let us know you got the test. But activate a zone, and whether it's social media, reverse 911, wireless emergency alert through your cell phone, we need to find out. We need to test that and make sure it gets out. And in doing so, I think we'll have the opportunity to really communicate with the public on, you got to know multiple ways out. We're not teaching you one exact evacuation route. You got to know multiple ways, consider, where your family is, where you're going, if you're going to stay with family in Paso or San Luis. So I think we'll have an opportunity to communicate with people as we go into more of the testing and evaluating. And I'd love to get to, we need to test the high-low sirens, making sure that people that live off the roadways can hear them. So we have a lot of next steps, but we'll continue to march forward, and communicating with the public will definitely be at the top of that.
Super. Okay. Thanks. I think that will do me for now. It's been very helpful.
Councilmember Darris.
Thank you. And I think, Chief Bryson, I think you just answered my question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway. First, I want to say it's a great study. You guys obviously put a ton of thought into this. I like all the, the way your mapping is, the road closures and how you've done it. I think once everybody gets to 101, I think it's going to work fantastic. I think some of us are on the same page, but we're concerned about the staffing and with the manual traffic control, which obviously is a great idea. But the question that I have is, you plan something out, and where my question came into my head was when I saw the time, the evacuation time under normal circumstances and under an evacuation time, how much different it was and how much longer it took. And it occurred to me that things don't always go as planned. So I'm thinking, in a worst case scenario, you've got people not going in the direction that they should be going to help traffic flow the best that it is. What safeguards, other than more manual traffic control, even at intersections where there are no stop signs in that we can do, or you can do, or whatever, to make sure that the traffic's continuing to flow as briskly as possible, even when people maybe not fully aware of what their particular route should be. They're just going, I just know I got to go in that direction, and then it could cause congestion. I mean, is there something that can be done to safeguard something like that?
Good question. Did you want to jump in, Steve?
Yeah, let me just, as you're talking, I'm thinking, you'll notice in terms of road closures, we limited the road closures around the interchanges. Close one side of town, close the off ramps. Those were the only closures. I would hesitate to recommend additional closures to force, like, say, neighborhoods to go one direction or the other. Because sometimes that will cause more problems in terms of congestion. People's, it's hard to say close, start putting road closures on city streets to want them to go one direction, and then people will invariably go that way, and then they get caught at a road closure, and that's just going to cause more confusion and congestion. Sometimes it's best to let the water flow. And in fact, I mentioned earlier that I was, I've been in an evacuation myself. Quick story: next door neighbor, she takes what was the normal route to get on our end of 101, to go 101 south to the city of Novato, which is normally a half-hour drive. And this was at 3:30 in the morning with no traffic out there. It took her 4 hours. Okay. I, being what I do, I went of the route of let's flow to where there's no water flowing, and did a very circuitous route to the west and up through the rural area to the west, and went the back way and made it to Nevada in an hour. Okay. I think it's best to kind of leave the roads open to let the water flow to where there's, people find ways out.
Yeah. Well, actually, I wasn't suggesting road closure. What I was commenting on what you've done around the highways where people can't go to the other side. That keeps it flowing there. That I thought was brilliant the way that works out. That's going to keep really, really well. But I'm just, again, imagining the worst case scenario up in the hills. Everybody's coming down, and where you should normally make a left, they go, you know what, I think I want to go to the right. And then, it could potentially cause, a traffic jam because they're not following what is sort of designed for them to be able to go. And I don't know if more manual traffic control is the solution to that, or if it's even a concern. I just don't know if you had thought about it, or if that's even a concern.
No, I think, what we try to do is identify what are the normal routes, because in a time of panic, in these situations, people will go the way they normally go to get to 101. And so if we've identified those routes, saw where we have these always stop controlled intersections, identified them for manual traffic control. And if, people will see if a certain route is moving along, that's the route people are going to join.
Okay.
So.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
The only other thing I would add, I think that was a great conversation for that. The only other thing I would add is before we hired W-Trans, AFD and APD spent a lot of time looking at each zone and looking for those special hazards and considerations and the control points inside each zone. So we used the traffic counts that Stonehaven provided, and we came up with those high priority intersections so we do know the intersections with the highest counts per Stonehaven. Now, at that time, we didn't necessarily know that most of our people would be needed down at 101. However, that data I think is still valid, and we would be able to, if we were having a zone with some critical issues on people going different directions and really locking things up, we know those intersections that just based on Stonehaven's counts and population and where they put their houses, we have those four-way stops where we would want to put officers. But it begs to your first question is officers, public works, we only have so many resources in Atascadero. And I'd almost go back to our first, our council goal of the comprehensive safety readiness. We named our public education campaign Defend Atascadero with the intention of making sure people know that you have to take some responsibility. So you need to know your multiple ways out. Just like Steve said, you need to know that back road to get to 41 and go out towards Morro Way. Because we do have a lot of those ways out. You just need to know. And so there's some responsibility that we need to do a good job of teaching the public that you got to be prepared to take your own actions to follow in and defend the task. That's how we coined that earlier.
In my experience, most of us know many ways to get to several places that we want to go anywhere in town. So I think, unless there's always going to be those folks that, maybe they're new to town, maybe they really haven't figured it out, and we want to help and educate as much as we can. But I think most of us really have it nailed. There's something I did want to point out. If you go to the map showing a potential zone 3, or not zone 3, but scenario C. So what I know about, particularly zone 18, because I live in zone 18, and I would assume that even zone 16 and maybe 15, kind of depending on how those roads go. If I'm going northbound, naturally, the way I'll go is I'll take Traffic Way and generally go to Santa Cruz. Now, the benefit to having the the asphalt on Traffic Way between Del Rio and Santa Cruz become a little worse over the last several years, I tend to take that less and I take Del Rio more. But still, Santa Cruz is an option. And I bring that up simply because if Santa Cruz is the one that's open at the north end for a lot of traffic to be funneling off, and if you have enough people trying to go that way to get out, I just wanted to bring that up. I don't know if that's something that you want to take a look at. But that could start to get congested up there if you have that as the off ramp for the northbound. And then you have other people from zones 15, 16, and 18 trying to get on going north. And you've got that, three-way stop there. It could get crowded. So just something to consider. I don't know if there's an easy way to look at it and say, oh, even if that does happen with X%, it's not a concern, or, oh, maybe we do need to make sure people funnel through Del Rio.
Okay.
But I have other ways I can get out too, so. So that was really my one thing. You can take that down.
We'll look into that. Thanks.
Sure thing.
Okay.
And any other council questions before we go to the public? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and open up public comment. If you'd like to speak, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. Anyone? *9, raising the hand. All right, looks like everybody is enthralled, but has nothing to input at the moment. So I will go ahead and close that public comment and bring it back to council. And I think we really were kind of doing a receive and file. I'm going to quickly ask the chief, is there, but besides any last questions or comments, is there anything specific you wanted to get from us, or is this really just mostly a receive and file?
I think we're mostly just receive and file. We wanted to ask for any input if you have any. We're definitely willing to. Everybody sees the town differently, like you just did, Mayor. You go through a certain intersection and you see an intersection that gets filled quickly. So any input, we're glad to take it. We'll take it back. And then, like I said, we have quite a bit of work still ahead of us, working with getting on the same page with Caltrans and CHP. But really just receive, file, give you an update on where we're at and any input you have.
And Chief, if there are members of the public who have input, maybe they know, like, hey, in our neighborhood and we're in one of those zones, this is kind of what tends to happen. How should they know to, get in touch with you or to let you know about, something that we might not naturally know about?
Well, I think we'll have that opportunity as we start to test a little bit the notifications. I think we'll be able to hear from people. I really hope that this next year we'll be able to have more of a community event, which we haven't done in over a year, right? So kind of a wildfire preparedness and evacuation. We'll definitely be rolling out all the public ed campaigns again before next season. And I think we'll have that opportunity. We'll have to kind of put some thought into how we solicit some of that input though. Because there is some good ideas out there from people, I'm sure, on their own individual traffic situation. We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah, I think it will be very important to hear from our community. I mean, not only to get our information out about their safety and what they need to do, but I think there's a lot of good information that they're going to have for us. And when we do those public events, I know Councilmember Bourbeau and I are more than happy to put out a car fire again. We're on the case. As long as there are 12 of you to come by and push us forward.
Absolutely.
Councilmember Funk, I did see you had something to say.
Yes, as a closing question, I just wanted to ask, what do you most need from members of the public right now? And what should they be doing?
Well, we had this discussion earlier today that we get the word out on Know Your Zone, and Terry did a phenomenal job. We got it all over the place, right? We got our mailers out, we got our flyers, we did stickers, we have magnets you can come in and pick up at City Hall. But I think the lifespan of that it dies pretty quickly. So I have people that don't know about Know Your Zone, and I feel like it was on a billboard. You drove by it every day on the street. So I think for us, it's just continuing the education. We just need to do it again and again and again. And like I said, we'll bring it back up. We'll do another campaign here for sure before fire season of next year. But I think just continuing to get the word, spread the word. We'll have it on our website, consistently. And so it's just that constant reminder of what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other council member comments?
Thank you for all your hard work. You put a lot into it and it shows. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Weinberg, for being here, and Chief Bryson, thank you and your team very much.
Thank you.
All right, we'll now move on to council announcements and committee reports, and I will just go according to my screen here and start with Councilmember Darris.
I don't have anything to report.
All right, Councilmember Borbo.
Yes, at the last IWMA meeting, we adopted some immediate changes to the joint powers agreement to reflect the county's departure. And these are just what I would call just the bare necessities to reflect that the county would no longer be a member after November 15th. So remove references to the county being a member, or the main reference, I should say, to the county being a member, as well as the reference to the county, to a supervisor having to be at the meetings to take action, and also remove the eight positive vote supermajority requirement, because if that remained there, then you would have an 8-member board. It would require unanimity for any action. So those are the immediate changes, just to reflect that, so that the board can continue to function. And the board also voted it at its next meeting. It will create a committee to review the joint powers agreement more thoroughly. And so we'll be forming that committee at our November meeting, would be the expectation, to again review the entire joint powers agreement and try to incorporate any other changes that the cities that are remaining would like to see. And so we might be asking each jurisdiction to consider what things they would like to see. There is a resolution going around, primarily drafted by city managers, but basically similar at each city, wherein the cities are voting or passing a resolution expressing their intent to remain in the IWMA and asking for certain things to occur as part of that. So you might expect that our next council meeting will have the JPA amendment, the immediate JPA amendment, and that resolution. I consider the amendment to be the far more important thing, because that's necessary to continue to do business. The resolution we can discuss when that arrives. We also received a little bit late, because our consultant was in the hospital, a report on, hello, Abigail, our report on the financial impact of the county leaving, in terms of it affecting the previously passed IWMA rate increase that was necessary to implement the requirements of 1383. So that rate increase will be revised, and that data provided to all the cities. The draft report has been provided, but the final report will need to be put out there soon.
So, Councilmember Borbo, I know there are one or two provisions that I think the majority of the cities, if not all, were agreeing upon, but it's not in those immediate changes that were made. When do you see that coming back?
I would see that the committee would be formed at our November meeting. I think we'll have some discussion about whether we would expect that back, that committee to present its recommendations back to the full board, probably in December, no later than January, but probably in December. And then that JPA amendment, to address all of the concerns. And there may be, some things that not everybody shares the same concerns. So there'll have to be some discussion about that. And I would expect that to come back out to the cities for ratification in January, no later than February. And if you recall, I don't know if you've seen the resolution that several cities have already considered, some of them, a couple of them tonight, some of them last 2 weeks ago, and Paso 4 weeks ago. They were asking that a revision occur within 6 months. So that would be well within that time frame.
Thank you. Councilmember Funk.
We have a meeting of the Atascadero Groundwater Sustainability Agency Basin Executive Committee on the Wednesday, the 3rd of November. That will be the big meeting to review the plan that was presented in summary to this body a couple of sessions ago. And so that we'll be looking at all the comments that came in about the plan and doing, as I understand it, major to review and approve the plan. And I continue to have a lot of activities related to the Homeless Services Oversight Council.
Mayor Pro Tem Newsom.
I have nothing to report.
Let's see. I hosted the mayor's meeting here in Atascadero, which was loved to do because it was at our new Zoo Garden Event Center. So it was nice to show off that, and Flavia and Crystal from the zoo, who are so knowledgeable about the animals and the conservation efforts that we do at the Charles Paddock Zoo, brought out a few animals for everyone to see. So a flamingo, the tortoise, and one of the prehensile porcupines. So much thanks to them, and to Colony Market in Delhi that did our lunch, which was great. Charles, a thank you to you for coming and discussing the IWMA issue. Bringing that to the mayor's roundtable has been very useful for the past few months to help us start to take some action, the resolutions that we're putting in place. So thank you for being part of that. And Assemblyman Cunningham came, so it was nice to hear from him and get a good update and really hear about the things that he's been doing in terms of offshore wind and the type of alternative energy in our county that is really making us a leader in California, if not the nation. So it's exciting to hear those things. And I have an RTA meeting, Regional Transit Authority, next Wednesday. And with that, we will go to any individual determination or actions. I'm not seeing any, none from staff. I'm hearing none. All right, meeting adjourned all. Have a great rest of your October and a great Halloween.